Right now, polls in Ohio are just about an hour away from closing. The key race on the ballot tonight, the Republican Senate primary contest. I want to get an update right now from CNN's Jeff Zeleny. He's in Columbus, Ohio for us. Jeff, who are the candidates and what are we learning from some of these exit polls that have just been released?
Well, as you know, Ohio, a longtime presidential battleground, tonight is a Senate race battleground. All eyes are on this Republican Senate primary. Three candidates locked in a race to challenge Senator Sherrod Brown, the Democratic senator, in November. It will be one of the closest Senate contests of the year. There are three candidates, as you said. State Senator Matt Dolan. He is endorsed by the establishment Republican wing here, if you will. Governor Mike DeWine, former Senator Rob Portman. He is in a tight challenge with Trump-backed candidate Bernie Moreno, a Cleveland businessman. The Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose also on the ballot. So these three men vying for not only the winner to challenge Sherrod Brown, but also for the direction of the Republican Party, Wolf. This could be one of the last gasps of the establishment versus the MAGA movement, if you will. But we are getting a look at those exit polls tonight. Let's take a look at some of these preliminary numbers. And these were conducted by conversations and interviews with voters as they went to polling places across Ohio today, as well as early voting in the last couple of weeks. Some interesting findings here, Wolf. When asked about the opinion of Trump when he was president, 58% said they strongly approve, 20% say they somewhat approve, 7% somewhat disapprove, 13% strongly disapprove. Wolf, those numbers tell us a couple things. One, this is a very Trump-friendly electorate, a very MAGA electorate, if you will. Perhaps not surprisingly, of course, in Ohio, a state that was carried by 8 points by Trump in 2020. Going on to look at these numbers, do you think Biden legitimately won in 2020? 32% said yes, 62% said no. Also interesting, some 6 in 10 voters, Republican voters, saying that Joe Biden did not legitimately win the election. Again, similar to what we've seen in other states. And finally, just a vision and view of the Republican Party. When asked the Republican Party is about right, 40% said that. Not conservative enough, 37% responded in that way, and 20% said too conservative. So, Wolf, again, these preliminary numbers offer a snapshot into the electorate today, and it certainly would seem that Bernie Moreno, the Trump-backed candidate in this race, we know he had strong support going in. The former president rallied here over the weekend, certainly a friendly electorate to him, but as well, talking to Republicans across the board here, Matt Dolan also had strong support going in. So about an hour left of voting here in Ohio. This race, the importance of it, though, will be in November when the winner of tonight's race takes on Senator Sherrod Brown in the fall, Wolf.
We'll see what happens tonight, and then we'll see what happens in November. Thanks very, very much, Jeff Zeleny, reporting from Columbus, Ohio. I want to turn now to Donald Trump. The presumptive Republican presidential nominee is expanding on his offensive, very offensive, new attacks involving Democrats, American Jewish voters, and Israel. CNN's Brian Todd is working the story for us. Brian, Trump is doubling down tonight on a familiar strategy of playing into various anti-Semitic views and stereotypes.
He is, Wolf, as he's done before, and it seems to be somewhat of a political calculation. Either way, the former president is taking serious heat tonight for all of his comments about Jewish voters. Disturbing comments from the former president on American Jewish voters. On a podcast, Donald Trump was asked about recent criticism of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that had come from the Biden administration and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Trump said those people, quote, hate Israel. Then,
any Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion, they hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves because Israel will be destroyed.
Pressed on that today, Trump didn't back down.
I think that the Democrats have been very, very opposed to Jewish people. That's true, and to Israel.
It's all drawn a sharp response from the Anti-Defamation League.
It's prejudicial, it's patently false, and we have to push back. Whether you vote blue or red has not necessarily been an indicator of your passion or your support for Israel.
Trump's comments also brought immediate condemnation from the Biden White House, which said Trump spread, quote, toxic, false stereotypes that threaten fellow citizens. This isn't the first time Trump has been criticized for trafficking in anti-Semitic tropes or having his respect for Jewish people called into question. In a 2016 interview with CNN, he refused to condemn former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke.
Will you unequivocally condemn David Duke?
I know nothing about David Duke. I know nothing about white supremacists.
Trump later claimed he had disavowed Duke. In his new book, The Return of Great Powers, CNN's Jim Sciutto quotes retired General John Kelly, Trump's former White House chief of staff, as saying that Trump once praised Adolf Hitler. Kelly saying, quote, he said, well, but Hitler did some good things. I said, well, what? And he said, well, Hitler rebuilt the economy. I said, sir, you can never say anything good about the guy. Nothing. In 2021, a spokeswoman for Trump denied that he had praised Hitler. As president, Trump also failed to counter anti-Semitic hatred, like after white supremacists' violent rallies in Charlottesville.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
But as president, Trump did take actions that were very beneficial to Israel, like moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And he's often spoken glowingly about his daughter Ivanka, who converted to Judaism, and his Jewish grandchildren. Why would he make those comments about Jewish voters now?
The bet is that the Jewish vote has been so resoundingly pro-Biden and pro-Democratic that even weakening it just a little bit in a really close election could make a difference.
Today, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, according to Bloomberg, called Trump's comments, quote, disgusting and toxic. But Trump's campaign remains defiant, saying in a statement, quote, the Democrat Party has turned into a full-blown anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, pro-terrorist cabal, end quote. Wolf.
Brian Todd, thanks for that report. Brian Todd reporting for us. I'm joined now by CNN anchor and chief political correspondent Dana Bash and CNN senior political analyst Gloria Borger. Dana, as Trump doubles down on playing into these rather ugly anti-Semitic views, leading Republicans are avoiding commenting on all of this. What kind of impact could that have on Trump?
Well, I think the biggest impact that it could have on Trump is that he clearly has a goal to try to siphon some votes from the Jewish community in America that traditionally go to the Democrats over to him because of some of the things that he did do when he was in office, moving the embassy, but also, maybe most importantly, the Abraham Accords, which did allow for a broader peace. That is very much not happening right now, obviously, because of what happened with Hamas, the war between Gaza and Israel. The question is whether or not, by the former president saying what he said on the radio show, doubling down, as you heard in Brian's piece today, whether or not it's going to have the opposite effect, that American Jews who may not be thrilled with the way that the Biden administration is right now approaching Israel might look at Trump and say, I'm sorry, you're not going to tell me what I feel and what I believe as a Jew. And just anecdotally, I've certainly heard some of that. Never mind, Wolf, what we need to underscore, which is what he said is an age-old anti-Semitic trope questioning the loyalty of Jews in the country that they're living in, asking if they believe more in their religion or if they're patriotic to the country that they live in. It's a false choice.
Yeah.
And who is Donald Trump, by the way, to raise this issue? I mean, he is effectively telling Jews in America what they ought to believe, and that if they vote for Democrats, and by the way, there was a recent poll which showed that 71% of Jews do vote for Democrats, that they're being disloyal to Israel. And it is absurd, it's defamatory, and it's just a patent play, as Dana was saying, to siphon off some of those voters that he thinks may be available to him. But it's absolutely ridiculous. He did it when he was in the Oval Office in 2019. Brian's piece talked about Charlottesville, good people on both sides. This isn't something new we're hearing from Donald Trump, but still it's sort of stunning every time you hear it.
It's interesting, Dana, because these latest Trump comments come as our own Jim Sciutto reveals in his brand new book that Trump privately praised Hitler, saying, and I'm quoting him now, he did some good things. You and I have seen firsthand what unchecked anti-Semitism can do when we were both at Auschwitz last year. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was almost a year ago that you and I went to Poland and went to Auschwitz in particular and did see what unchecked anti-Semitism can lead to, and that is an entire society ending up supporting the notion of mass killings, concentration camps, and the goal of extermination of the Jewish people. And that's why silence is not an option. And that's why explaining what these tropes are and what their origins are and what they have ended up doing in various societies, not just in World War II, but at other times in human history, is critical.
You know, and what Donald Trump is doing is dividing. This is what he does best. This is how he earns his keep every day, which is to divide the electorate in different slices. And what he's trying to do here is divide the Jewish community, which is, of course, struggling with what's going on in Gaza and what happened during the terror attack. And he's further trying to divide a community and just, you know, play for some votes. It's actually deplorable.
It certainly is. All right, Gloria Borger, Bash, to both of you, thank you very, very much. Just ahead, my interview with a key UNICEF official who is on the ground in Gaza right now as the United Nations issues very dire warnings about imminent famine there. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room. Right now, the United Nations is sounding the alarm in Gaza as the threat of famine grows worse by the day. According to UNICEF spokesman James Elder, desperately needed relief is just across the border, but is not getting in. Listen.
Outrageous how many life-saving supplies are so desperately close to those who need them. Food, water, medicines, life-saving supplies, because we know just across there in the border, children have died of malnutrition. Children have died of dehydration. These are the supplies that so urgently need to get across into the civilians of Gaza.
And James Elder is joining us now live from Rafah in Gaza. James, thank you very much for joining us. You say that Gaza is terrifyingly close to famine. Walk us through what you actually saw in Rafah today, the impact of this aid being held up.
Yeah, a couple of things, Wolf. One is simply that you see in the face of children, you see now the children are haunted. You see the stress and anxiety on families, parents spending days looking for food. That's Rafah. Was also which is right next door, which is probably the most devastated place I've seen in my years of the United Nations annihilation. A hospital there that was such a part of providing health for children. That is simply no longer functioning like most hospitals in Gaza. This is a braver time, and somehow, Wolf, it's getting worse.
The UN's top human rights official is now warning that Israel could be committing a war crime. Starvation, he points out, is a weapon of war. Do you see evidence of that on the ground?
We've seen children starve. We have seen children die of malnutrition. That's a terrible thing to see. Well, remembering malnutrition is a killer, but it's normally an underlying killer. They will something like a pneumonia, kill boys and girls. Malnutrition means that dehydration, child is in a hospital, their body shrunk so much, a doctor can't get into a vein. This is what we're starting to see. So the numbers speak to this. We are seeing catastrophic levels of malnutrition higher than we've ever seen in the last 20 years in a particular country. So unfortunately, the numbers that people see on the ground speak to the most dire situation for boys and girls, and that's nutrition alongside disease. About 90% of children have some type of infectious disease. These two things together can be just as lethal as bombardments from the sky.
We're showing our viewers some of the videos of the complete destruction, your videos, complete destruction in Khan Yunis. What are you seeing and hearing about the toll this war is taking on families, especially on the children?
Yeah, it's a great question. All families are just utterly exhausted. Several times today, I had mothers that should hold my hand and break into tears, hoping somehow it would help them protect children. They know it's up to them to try, but they know power has been taken away from them. They know they have the power to ensure protection for their children from starvation, from air attacks. This is that level of exhaustion. People are now starting to accept that the reality is so great that they're faced. Now, we know that, as I say, there are trucks across the border miles away. Get a ceasefire, Emery, a ceasefire. When we're talking children, there are still children somewhere here who are held hostage. For goodness sake, let the pain for them and their families in Israel end. Get those children home. All these things happen with a ceasefire. Somehow we are a long way away from that, and it's been a long time since anyone here has had anything resembling peace.
James Elder of UNICEF, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe over there, and we'll be right back. Right now, we have an update on the health questions and the photo controversy that are swirling around the Princess of Wales and the British royal family. CNN's Max Foster reports on a new sighting of the princess as another photoshopped royal image was revealed.
Smiling, happy, and seemingly healthy. New video not sanctioned by the palace, but reassuring royalists that the couple are well. British tabloids also celebrating Kate's re-emergence and apparent recovery from surgery.
So it's good to see that she's back, and hopefully she's doing well.
I'm sure that it'll be quite nice for her to walk around, do some shopping with her husband.
I didn't really have any doubts. I don't know. Just a bit of a weird one, isn't it?
Weird because of the conspiracy theories that have swamped social media in recent weeks, filling a void of information from the palace. And the video did nothing to quell them, as it was accused of being fake. Trust in any royal imagery undermined, in part, by Kensington Palace itself, after it sent out not one but two doctored photos to the news media, both taken by the princess. Kate's edited Mother's Day photo, manipulated in several places. And now this one, released last year, which Getty Images has now labelled digitally enhanced. CNN found inconsistencies in several spots, such as a misalignment on the Queen's skirt and blanket. Strands of Princess Charlotte's hair appear to have been cloned, and Prince Louis's shoulder is blurred, overlapping the background. Getty told CNN in a statement it's reviewing all so-called royal handout images and placing, where relevant, an editor's note saying it could have been digitally enhanced.
William and Kate, Kensington Palace was so trusted at Christmas. And now, 3 months later, we have a situation in which whatever photo is put out, people don't believe it.
The lack of information coming from the palace about the princess has created conspiracy theories, often wild ones, which get worse when the palace has been found to be manipulating images.
Either they should have said nothing and kept with that, just as they said they were not going to say anything until there were significant updates, or they should have put out a few little statements, perhaps a little statement from Kate saying thank you for the lovely cards, and kept people updated to a degree.
Seemingly unfazed and in good spirits, royals refusing to be distracted in public. Prince William making a long-planned visit to a homelessness project in Sheffield. No lack of support there, or from the papers, as the rumours continue online.
More stories in the papers tonight here, Wolf. More speculation online, more rumours. It's difficult to see it ending until we actually see the princess out at an official engagement, which we're not expecting for another 2 weeks.
Max Foster reporting. Thank you very much, and we'll be right back. We're following chilling developments in Sudan. CNN's Nima Al-Bagr has more.
Propaganda video from the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. For much of the last year, they have slashed and burned their way through the country. This video shows them triumphant and entrenched in the very heart of Sudan, Al Jazeera state. And they are recruiting local men in the hundreds. But it's impossible to tell who here is a willing soldier and who has been forcibly conscripted. Eyewitnesses have told CNN that RSF soldiers are giving civilians an ultimatum: enlist or starve. Our investigation shows how almost 700 men and 65 children have been forcibly recruited to swell RSF ranks. And that's just what we've been able to verify in Jazeera. Across Sudan, reports and images like this one are emerging. Children in RSF uniform. As across Sudan, millions forced from their homes by violence now face famine. CNN spoke to 36 eyewitnesses, survivors, and the families of victims. The RSF, they say, is weaponizing hunger, denying food to those who won't join. Aid groups say almost 4 million children in Sudan are already malnourished as the country faces mass starvation. If aid agencies can't get food to those in need, almost 250,000 children could die. Jazeera is Sudan's breadbasket, its heartland. To control this part of Sudan is to exert control over who lives and who dies. The RSF deny they are responsible for the hunger gripping the country, yet they control every aspect of farming this land. They control the warehouses of food and aid meant to support the most vulnerable. They control the seed supplies, fertilizer, pesticides, agricultural machinery, and irrigation channels. And it's not just the infrastructure. Farmers are being targeted, brutalized, degraded, and even killed. Not just to control food, but to force allegiance. You hear shots off camera as 6 of the men are executed, according to survivors who spoke to CNN. Those who were spared say the RSF threatened to starve their families if they didn't join. The RSF sit in the heart of Sudan, hoarding food meant for millions. From here, they can wait out, starve out Sudan's people and its army. Fear, uncertainty, despair cascade as the months of war drag on and the world looks away. The RSF didn't respond to our request for comment. We also, though, shared our findings with the UN Special Rapporteur for Contemporary Slavery, who told us that the evidence we uncovered, the evidence you just saw there, is tantamount to contemporary slavery. Wolf?
Thanks very much to CNN's Nima El-Bagr, and to our viewers, thanks for watching. The news continues on CNN.
Out front next, the breaking news: Trump zeroing in on Kavanaugh, using the words of the justice he appointed to try to get his January 6th case thrown out, arguing that if he is not granted immunity, it is the, quote, end of the presidency as we know it. Plus, the CEO of a top luxury real estate firm says tonight that Trump can't sell his properties fast enough to pay $500 million by Monday. She's my guest tonight. And banned. He once served as the ambassador to Russia under Trump, and tonight Russia says he is no longer welcome there. Ambassador John Sullivan is with me tonight. Let's go out front. And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front this evening, the breaking news: Trump appealing to a man he placed on the Supreme Court in an effort to end the cases against him. And who is that? Well, that person is Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And in this 67-page filing filed by Trump's team today, the former president's legal team digging deep into Brett Kavanaugh's past to make their case as to why Trump should not be charged with trying to overturn the 2020 election. And as they go through this, they point to several statements made by Kavanaugh, including this one. And they quote, "A president who is concerned about an ongoing criminal investigation is almost inevitably going to do a worse job as president." Trump's team also going way back in time, going to a Georgia law article that Kavanaugh wrote, in which he says, and quoting again, "Prosecution or non-prosecution of a president is, in short, inevitably and unavoidably a political act." Well, a political act, that of course echoes what Trump has been saying since the start of the investigation, is that all of these court cases are political and election interference in their own right. And Trump's filing today is his last-ditch attempt to do two things. One, of course, is to delay the special counsel's election case altogether. And two is actually to take a step back and actually avoid being charged entirely for trying to overturn the 2020 election. And on that point, Trump's legal team says, quote, if immunity is not recognized, every future president will be forced to grapple with the prospect of possibly being criminally prosecuted after leaving office every time he or she makes a politically controversial decision. That would be the end of the presidency as we know it. Now, that argument was unanimously, of course, rejected by a federal appeals court. So just to be very clear here, what you're looking at in these 67 pages is Trump's last chance to make that case and to end these cases. Caitlin Polantz is out front live in Washington to begin our coverage tonight. And Caitlin, what else stands out to you in this new filing by Team Trump?
Well, Aaron, we've had a lot of court filings over the course of this investigation about presidential immunity, but the language here is really aimed at scaring justices on the Supreme Court who want to protect the presidency and executive power, executive authority. Some of the language Trump uses, he talks about post-office trauma that presidents might experience if they could be prosecuted for committing crimes while they are in office. He also talks about the de facto blackmail and extortion that they could face while in office. He also writes it could be the end of the presidency as we know it. That is a very stark phrasing of this threat that Trump's team perceives if there isn't some sort of immunity around the presidency. The other thing that stood out to me is that in one of these arguments over this 60-some page brief filing to the Supreme Court, Trump's team says motive shouldn't matter, and it's unfair to Trump if there's immunity for the presidency, but it falls away in a case like this where Trump or others could be accused of trying to hold on to power because they were trying to break the law to stay in power. Here's the direct quote. The court should reject the D.C. Circuit's alternative approach of denying a president criminal immunity when his conduct is allegedly motivated by the desire to remain in power lawfully. This approach risks creating the appearance of a gerrymandered ruling tailored to deprive only President Trump of immunity while leaving all other presidents untouched. So they're saying that even if a president is breaking the law to keep hold of that office, that is not a reason why there should not be a protection around the presidency, and thus Trump should be protected here as well.
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much. So I want to go straight to our legal expert, Ryan Goodman, because what Caitlin just said is pretty extraordinary. I mean, okay, they're saying because it's tailored just to apply to him. Well, there's a reason that it applies only to him, because he's the only one who actually tried to overturn an election.
Right.
So it's just this continual circular reasoning. As you go through the 67 pages, do you find anything more compelling in these arguments than you've heard from them before?
So the first half of the brief, there's nothing really compelling, and I don't think any of the justices, maybe one, but I don't even think any of them will sign on to this idea that all presidents are absolutely immune for any conduct in office. That's just a bridge too far.
Right. Well, you know, killing people. I mean, there are things.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, by the way, they've already said that if he had ordered someone to be killed, that wouldn't count. But Team Trump has said that. But
Team Trump has said that. That's right. But the second half is a smart legal argument, which is to say to the court, look, when you decide that there's not absolute immunity, then give us a test in which you define what the boundaries are, then send this whole thing back down to the trial court to apply your new test, which is a delay strategy. So the idea there being that then they hold hearings at the trial court, and then the Trump side can appeal any adverse hearings all the way back up to the Supreme Court. That's the move that's being made there. But it's a smart argument. It's the argument I think they should be making as smart lawyers.
Right, which is you need to put rules and you need to put a procedure and a test.
Yes.
Understandable. Okay. So do you think it has a chance of success? And in that context, what do you make of the fact that they repeatedly appealed to Justice Kavanaugh, who, of course, was appointed by Trump, but said all these things and wrote all these things, which seem at least taken out of context to support the argument that they're making?
It's a good move to try to quote the justices back at themselves. Also, in one of the paragraphs, they have both Kavanaugh and Scalia quoted together. Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, that can work. I imagine that Jack Smith might do the same thing if he thinks there's something in Kavanaugh's writings. The problem for Trump is that it's not really what Kavanaugh was saying. Kavanaugh was talking about why an incumbent president should not be distracted by ongoing criminal prosecutions or investigations. That's the Kavanaugh argument. Kavanaugh, I don't think, wants to be associated with this absolute immunity argument which they're making. So it actually might turn him off.
Right. And just to be clear, incumbent, and Trump is not incumbent. I mean, just to
absolutely,
clear,
and in fact,
so
the argument
it's not apples to apples.
Right, and those folks who think that the incumbent president is immune make the argument that he's immune or she's immune until they leave office, and that's the
situation we're in right now. Yeah. All right, Ryan, thank you very much. And as we are tracking this breaking news, we've got more breaking developments right now, which is that Donald Trump is now slamming the judge who ruled against him and his company in the Trump-Org fraud case, because literally we are in a time ticking down situation. Trump running out of time to come up with $464 million. That is what he's required to come up with to post bond by law by Monday on the deadline.
Are you looking forward to this campaign, this election?
I've been campaigning.
How are you doing it? You've got all these legal cases mounting up. They valued Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
At $18 million. I mean,
because the courts are rigged.
What's going on?
The courts are rigged. They did. They valued it. It had an appraisal at $1.5 billion, $1 billion, $2 billion. Who knows what it's worth? It's worth, because that was good for their narrative. So they valued it at $18 million because it's a crooked legal system, very crooked. That's why people are leaving New York. Companies are fleeing New York because of even this decision.
As our own Daniel Dale has pointed out, what Judge Engoron said was that a Palm Beach County tax assessment from the decade of 2011 to 2021 appraised the market value of Mar-a-Lago between $18 and $28 million. Now, this all comes as Trump's lawyers admitted so far that he does not have the $464 million, which he is required to post by law by Monday. What that means is that if he is treated like every other defendant in a posting bond situation, you just have to do it. You have to sell assets. You have to do whatever you have to do to make that bond. And for Trump, that would mean that he may have to sell some of his most prized properties. These are mega ticket items, or risk watching the state of New York seize them, as the state of New York has said it will. Out front now, someone who knows all of this inside out, the real estate industry inside out, Bess Friedman. She is the CEO of Brown Harris Stevens, which is a luxury real estate company that includes properties in New York, New Jersey, and Florida, all of the locations we're talking about. And Bess is also a lawyer. So Bess, you know, if just taking a look at where we are, today's Tuesday. It's only Tuesday. Okay, but by Monday he has to post this bond. If he hasn't started the process of selling any of his properties, and by the way, I don't even mean started. I mean, if you aren't really, really far down the path, these are big, big buildings. Does he have time to sell any of them by Monday?
I mean, I think it's a little, we don't have enough time. I mean, by Monday, that's really, I think you need at least 30 days to get any of these properties sold. But the property that you alluded to, Mar-a-Lago, potentially, that could be something that could be sold quickly. I think the valuation is something in the hundreds of millions, and I think there could be a buyer for something like that.
And that would be literally, if you're talking about doing that between now and Monday, that's picking up the phone, calling someone, and then literally writing a check.
Yeah, I mean, there could be plenty of international people who want to buy that property. I mean, there's properties that are priced at 150 and 200 million that are nearby that. And Palm Beach is like the NVIDIA, of real estate. It's just shot up like a rocket. And people do want to live there. They've moved there. So I think that would be the best case scenario as to property. If he's trying to sell quickly, I would encourage that.
So, all right, now that's 240 million estimated. I mean, who knows? You know, he's a desperate seller. In this case, someone picks up the phone and makes that call this week. So I don't know what it'd be. That's still half of what it would be. So when you look at other properties, I mean, you know, you've got his penthouse. Bloomberg values that at $40 million. I mean, that doesn't get you there either. But is that something you could even sell quickly?
I mean, the good news about that property is the location is incredible. It's a condominium, which means it could sell quickly. You still have to get through a board process, a package, an application. But it's a building that was built in the early 80s. So I don't know if it's been renovated. And remember, you know, not everybody wants that affiliation with that building, with the name. You know, it does have a stigma for some. And so that could be a bit of a challenge. And so, you know, the price doesn't determine the market determines the price. And so it will depend on if there's somebody who really wants to buy something like that and do a renovation and make it their own and is comfortable living in a building that has his name. And that's not everybody's taste. So I think it could be a bit of a challenge.
And so how do you really even turn something like this quickly? I mean, what is the process to even do this? And when you talk about it, someone who they're going to want to get a deal.
Right.
I mean, this is the definition of a desperate seller. In this particular instance, you've got 5 days.
Yeah, I mean, I think he needs to look at all of his assets in real estate. He has a lot of them, great locations, and he needs to figure out what those values are and get them on the market and get people looking at them. I'm sure there's interest. I mean, look, Jeffrey Epstein's mansion sold in New York City. It took some time. They had to cut the price, but there was somebody that was willing to buy that. Same with Bernie Madoff. We were able to sell his co-op. So people will buy the real estate. It just will take time, but the sooner the better, and the sooner they evaluate what he has and get it out there, it will be better for him.
All right, Bess, thank you very much. I mean, just an incredible situation. I even believe we're even talking about such a thing, but this is the reality. All right, thank you so much.
Aaron.
And next, well, in the slammer for Trump, former Trump aide Peter Navarro is inside this Miami prison on your screen tonight. That is where he is, as the former president resides comfortably not far away right now in Mar-a-Lago. Michael Cohen, who also served time because of his ties to Trump, is out front next. Plus, breaking news, polls are about to close in Ohio, and this is absolutely crucial. This is the fight for control of the Senate. Trump facing a major test of his power there tonight. And then another doctored royals photo taken by Kate Middleton. We're going to talk to a professional photographer who says she knows exactly what was altered in the photo, and you'll see bit by bit. Tonight in the slammer for Trump, Peter Navarro, Trump's former White House aide, is now sitting inside this Miami prison. It's one of the oldest prison camps in the United States, and it happens to be less than 100 miles from where Trump is living right now, at Mar-a-Lago. Navarro joins the growing list of Trump associates who have served time. Michael Cohen, who will join me in a moment, sentenced to 3 years behind bars. Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, sentenced to 4 months in prison. That sentence on hold as he's pending an appeal. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Former campaign advisor George Papadopoulos. Trump associate Roger Stone. The deputy chairman of Trump's campaign, Rick Gates, all were sentenced to time behind bars. Former Trump org CFO Alan Weisselberg has served time at Rikers and could be going back. I mean, when you think about it and you list it out like that, it's pretty incredible. Selin Sarfati is out front with more.
I'm pissed. That's what I'm feeling right now.
Former Trump advisor Peter Navarro defiant as he reports to federal prison in Miami today.
Every person who has taken me on this road to that prison is a friggin' Democrat and a Trump hater.
Navarro is facing a 4-month sentence for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena from the committee that investigated the January 6th attacks on the U.S. Capitol.
But as hard as it will be on me, and as hard as it will be on anybody who is in there, it's harder on their families. And this is who those Democrats have hurt.
Navarro, at age 74, will be serving his time in an air-conditioned dormitory within the prison reserved for elderly inmates. He'll have access to TVs, the ability to email and make phone calls.
Chinese protectionism.
At one time, a respected economist, a voice on China, and Harvard-trained professor, Navarro regularly appeared on mainstream media.
Peter is brash.
And decades ago tried unsuccessfully to run for local office as an independent and Democrat, attracting the endorsement of Hillary Clinton and landing a prime speaking spot at the 1996 Democratic National Convention.
Together with President Clinton, we will protect Medicare and Social Security and a woman's right to choose.
But some who have known him since back then say his shaky ideologies.
He's a great chameleon. He clearly was able to adapt to who they are and what they're about.
Were trumped easily by the spotlight.
We have the great Peter Navarro.
Navarro morphing into a MAGA loyalist.
This president has been the toughest president on China of any American president.
And Trump devotee.
If you look statistically at what happened, clearly the president won this election and was leading on Election Day.
Promoting some of the former president's most controversial and baseless claims.
And on things like, for example, the hydroxychloroquine, he has a strong point of view. There's as many doctors on the other side.
So, Peter, first of all, just on a basic level, you're an economist, not a scientist.
And now, like Trump.
So the little story here is Navarro's going to prison today.
Attempting to turn his fate into a badge of honor.
Men and women of America throughout our history have shed blood, lost their lives for the defense of this country. It's a much smaller sacrifice to be willing to go to prison.
And this marks the first Trump official to go to prison for contempt charges of Congress. Steve Bannon, of course, has also been convicted of contempt charges for defying those subpoenas from the January 6th committee. But of course, he has remained out of jail, Aaron, so far because he is ruling and trying to appeal this ruling. Aaron.
All right, Sunlen, thank you very much. And out front now, former Trump attorney who also went to prison, Michael Cohen, the author of Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the U.S. Department of Justice Against His Critics, also the host of the Mea Culpa and Political Beatdown podcast. So, Michael, you hear Navarro, he's saying he's defending the country by going to prison, standing by, I'm standing by Trump, I'm going to prison for him. You were once, to some extent, in his shoes, right, for things that you did while we're with Trump. You served time. And we've got images of you going to prison in 2019, a day I'm sure you will never forget because of your loyalty to Trump. There you are in the car. So as you see Navarro go to prison, what do you see?
It makes me recall an old adage, troubled people cause trouble. Donald is that troubled person, and he's causing trouble. Peter Navarro has no idea just how bad prison actually is. And I'm speaking from experience, not once but twice, when I was unconstitutionally remanded the second time back. It's terrible, but there's more implications that people aren't even aware of. All your bank accounts end up getting closed. You can't get credit cards. You can't even open up a bank account at any bank because your name is on a list. Your whole life changes. And why is it changing? Because he's doing something for Donald Trump, a guy who's 100 miles away from him, enjoying a Mar-a-Lago burger and a bunch of ice cream at his gilded club. I don't know what he's thinking.
So let's talk about where he is. So you served about a year in prison, and then you continued to serve your term during COVID. You were okay, but Navarro, he's sentenced to 4 months. Does that make what are those first 4 months like? I mean, how does he manage that? And also, we had shown images, but he is in FCI Miami, which is a prison you know a lot about.
Well, I know something about it. I was in FCI Otisville, very different than FCI Miami. I knew a few people that actually came from FCI Miami to Otisville. It's not a good place. No different than Alan Weisselberg, who spent 100 days at Rikers Island. It is not a cakewalk. Any of these FCIs are not. First of all, you come in to the facility and you have nothing. It's a weird experience, especially for somebody who is of his age. You don't even own a toothbrush. You don't have a hairbrush. You don't have soap. You don't have shampoo. All you have is what they give to you, which is a pillow, a blanket. They give to you one pair of socks, a pair of underwear, a pair of pants that generally don't fit. They do that on purpose, and a T-shirt and a regular shirt. That's what you get. That's what you own. So coming from the world that Peter Navarro came from, spending time at the gilded casa of Donald, Mar-a-Lago.
Harvard professor, known economist. I mean, I knew Peter Navarro all the way back when I worked at CNBC. He was a guy who came on regularly. He was.
This is not an experience. This is not an experience that he wanted to have in his memory.
You said it takes your soul.
It does. Prison takes your soul. The time that you're away from your family, your friends, your life, you never get it back. You never get it back. On top of that, I don't know what their rules are right now in terms of COVID. Do they hold them the first 5 days, 10 days, 14 days in solitary? That's another issue in and of itself. Remember, I did 51 days of solitary confinement.
He gave a press conference today, Navarro did, talking about it, obviously before he walks on the inside of FCI Miami. And I wanted to play one part of it for you.
Sure.
Are you nervous, and have you spoken to Donald Trump?
I am not nervous. I'm not talking about I'm going to claim executive privilege on the Donald Trump conversations. I've had the greatest amount of support from Donald Trump and his team.
What do you say to that? Greatest amount of support from Donald Trump and his team as he's heading to prison. Of course, Trump is not.
And look where you're going. And trust me, it's easy to be a television tough guy when you're on the outside. When you're on the inside, there are rules. Whether you're in a satellite camp, a low, like I was in, or you're in a maximum security. The rules are still the rules. He doesn't live by those rules. He's never had to live by those rules. This is an adjustment that he has no idea what he's in store for.
Oh, it is incredible when we think about it. All right. Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it.
Let me also just say the food is terrible.
Well, there's that. You don't control what you eat. You don't control when you sleep. I mean, all of it. I mean, as you say, it is impossible to imagine it. But when you say it, perhaps gives everyone a glimpse into what it could be. All right. Well, next we have breaking news. We are just moments away from polls closing in Ohio. And this race matters. Hunger Games is basically playing out in the Republican primary for Senate seat that could decide the entire balance of power, and Trump is at the center of it tonight. Plus, U.S. troops about to get kicked out of a country that was once a key U.S. ally. Is Putin behind this? Breaking news, the first polls have just closed in tonight's elections. 5 states are voting, and we are watching closely for signs of strengths or weaknesses for Biden and Trump. But there are other crucial races tonight, and we are expecting results from Ohio at any moment. Republicans there trying to take down Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown, locked in an ugly primary fight. And in that 3-way race, the Trump-backed candidate is in a dead heat with a more moderate Republican. So can he bring him over the finish line tonight? It is a crucial test, and Jeff Zeleny is out front.
He's one of the last Democrats standing in Ohio.
Thank you for the endorsement. Thank you all for being here.
Senator Sherrod Brown is one of the biggest Republican targets of the year, whose seat could determine control of the U.S. Senate. But that fall campaign may hinge on tonight's outcome of an acrimonious GOP primary, which in the closing days has revolved as much around Donald Trump as any of the rivals in the race.
Bernie, if these people all vote, which they will, you're going to win. Man.
The former president has taken sides and thrown elbows in a bruising 3-way Republican contest. His candidate, Cleveland businessman Bernie Moreno,
How does Ohio feel about President Donald J. Trump?
Is seen by some top Ohio Republicans as the party's weakest choice to win in November.
The person clearly who has the best shot at winning in the fall is Matt Dolan. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
Republican Governor Mike DeWine is backing State Senator Matt Dolan, whose family owns the Cleveland Guardians baseball franchise and has repeatedly drawn Trump's ire.
My attitude is anybody that changes the name of the Cleveland Indians to the Cleveland Guardians should not be a senator.
The campaign has been caustic and costly, with more than $40 million spent on TV and digital ads alone.
MAGA alert. President Trump wants you to vote for outsider businessman Bernie Moreno.
Matt Dolan, out for himself, not you.
Can you trust Frank LaRose?
Including by a Democratic super PAC with ties to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, promoting Moreno, Trump's candidate.
Moreno would do Donald Trump's bidding.
Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, the third candidate in the race, told us it was a clear sign Democrats wanted to run against Moreno.
Why would they spend over $3 million to try to boost Bernie Moreno? Well, it's pretty clear Chuck Schumer believes that he's the weakest opponent to Sherrod Brown.
In an increasingly red Ohio, where Trump won by 8 points in 2020, the race has become a test for the style and substance of the Republican Party in the age of Trump.
Fighting is about results, okay? And it doesn't mean you go and shout and scream. You can respect the other side, but you fight for what you believe in.
Tonight, it will become clear whether more voters respond to Dolan's attempts to lower the temperature or follow Trump's lead.
Everybody's bashing everybody. I believe the Moreno commercials that he will support the Trump agenda.
For Brown, as he seeks a 4th term in the Senate, he acknowledges the challenge ahead, not only from Republicans.
Maybe my toughest race.
How much of a weight is the Democratic Party and the Biden administration on you as a candidate?
I always run my own race. I will continue to run my own race. I don't try to analyze if Biden does well here or Trump does well there.
I've run ahead of our presidential candidates, and I will again.
So, Aaron, as the polls are closing here tonight, we are getting a snapshot of the electorate. Republicans who voted today. The preliminary exit poll numbers are so instructive. Let's take a look at a couple of them. The opinion of Trump when he was president. 57% of voters today said they strongly approved. 20% said they somewhat approved. So if you add those together, some 3/4 of Republicans approved, perhaps not surprisingly, but the disapprove number also interesting. 14% strongly disapprove, 7% somewhat disapprove. So clearly there's an opening there for a non-Trump candidate. But Aaron, take a look at these numbers for President Biden. Republican primary voters were asked if they believed he legitimately won in 2020. 6 in 10 Republicans say he did not. 32% say he did. So that, of course, sets the table for the conversation going on in the months ahead to November. Aaron, the reason this race is so important, the Senate majority hinges on 2 seats, on only 1 if the president's party is still in power here. So that's why this race will be one to keep an eye on until November, Aaron.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff Zeleny. Basil Smykel, former chief of the New York Democratic Party out front, and Harry Enton, our data guru. Harry, those numbers on these exit polls, I suppose we should no longer be surprised. No. What do you say? Shocked but not surprised.
Yes.
About the GOP 63% saying Biden is not the legitimately elected. But it is incredible.
Yeah. I don't think we can be surprised anymore, but we can still shake our heads that about 2/3 of the Republican electorate, depending on which primary state you're jumping to, believe something that's a fugazi, that's fake. We all know that Biden legitimately won that election, yet 2/3 of Republicans believe otherwise, depending, again, on the state you're looking at. And that just shows the stranglehold that Donald Trump has over the Republican Party. There's still maybe about 1/4 of that Republican Party that's willing to go the other way. That is that strongly or somewhat disapproved that Jeff was pointing out. But the fact is they are a minority. The majority of the party is firmly in Trump's pocket.
All right, on that point, though, I'm just going to take the strongly disapprove on this exit poll for Republican voters in Ohio tonight. 14%.
Right.
Strongly disapprove.
Right.
What does that mean? Does that mean that they are, I mean, you could presume maybe those are people who are going to have gone for Haley but do they get back on board? Do they not? I mean, and are they truly going to be the people who possibly decide this whole election?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the general election, that's the kind of voter that Joe Biden's going to go after, right? He's going to go after that sort of not Republican, but not satisfied with Donald Trump, would probably have voted for a Nikki Haley, but really just doesn't like the direction of the Republican Party. But it is concerning, quite frankly, that 60% of the Republican. Remember when Ohio?
63%.
Remember when Ohio was a swing state? Remember those? Remember those?
I remember standing in Ohio, so it must have been 2012.
Yeah.
And I was there that night on election night because we needed someone there because as goes Ohio, goes the nation.
Yeah, that's right.
That was the last time that
That's
was
right.
true.
And so it's really concerning that with 63% in Ohio of Republicans, but we see that pattern across the country, that there is this denialism of Joe Biden being the duly elected president of this country that really does go to show you how Donald Trump has really changed the Republican Party to shift to his worldview.
Yeah.
It also suggests that which is what's happening in Ohio now, this might be the last stand for a sort of mainstream Republican to potentially meet Sherrod Brown in the general election. But where are mainstream Republicans across the country in terms of their ability to stand up against Trump-endorsed Republicans?
I should refine what I said. I don't mean it's the last time that Ohio went the way of the country, but it's the last time that Ohio was really up for grabs, right? Ohio has become a red state. Okay, so in this context, Ohio being a red state, where's President Biden spending his time? Well, not in Ohio. No. He's going to Nevada and Arizona, these battlegrounds, and certainly he's going to go to the Midwest as well. But he's going there. Large Hispanic and Latino populations in both, crucial voting bloc this time around, especially in the context of the broader conversations. But 1.8 million votes combined at stake between those two states. And these Hispanic and Black voters and Biden, this has been an area he's been struggling. Yeah. What some might consider to have been, certainly among Black voters, his base, but even among some Hispanic voters. So you have been talking about this with me for a long time.
Yeah.
Where is Biden now versus where he was 4 years ago with those groups?
Yeah, there's been a lot of folks who have been analyzing these numbers and show that Biden's been doing significantly worse among Black and Hispanic voters compared to the exit polls 4 years ago. But there was some argument, okay, wait a minute, but what about this point in time? Well, I went back to this point in time 4 years ago, and you still see Biden doing considerably worse than he was 4 years ago.
So this is polls 4 years ago at this time in the election. Okay,
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Exactly right. And what we see is, Joe Biden's still winning among Black voters, but only by 50 points. He was up 72 points at this point in the 2020 cycle. And among Hispanic voters, Biden is barely ahead, just by 2 points versus 21 points at this point in the 2020 cycle. On those Black voters, I have never seen a Democratic presidential candidate in my lifetime leading by such a small margin as Joe Biden is at this particular point in time.
So,
do those numbers leave your jaw on the floor?
I am concerned, and I'm concerned for this particular point. This notion of the lesser of two evils has really has sunken in, and that is what's concerning me. In 2016, there was a lot of conversation around the lesser of two evils, comparisons from Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump. That sameness, samesies.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same. It's never been the same. And the concern is that that language and that narrative will get baked into this election. They are not the same. When you have Donald Trump out there saluting the individuals who were engaged in an insurrection and went to jail, if you have him out there saying
these voters,
that
are they basically saying they don't care about that, or they care about other things? So I mean, plus 21 to plus 2.
No, I honestly think that by the end of this election, they will care. They'll care about democracy. They'll care about the fact that Donald Trump is out there with his conservative colleagues restricting voter access as opposed to expanding it. And let me tell you why I am more concerned about that point than anything else. Because the Brennan Center for Justice just released a report saying that the gap between white and non-white voter turnout is widening. And it's widening in states where the Supreme Court has actually gutted the Voting Rights Act. And what I would say in response to that is, look at what conservatives, both voters and electeds and judges, have done. They've restricted your rights, not increased them. And that's the kind of message that I think needs to hit home with those voters. And
so, Harry, Trump has also been going to those same states.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the states. We all know these are the great seven that determined the whole thing last time and very well may this time. I mean, you had, Arizona, Georgia, 10,000 votes between the two of them. So what are the states you're looking at now?
Yeah, I mean, look, you pointed out Georgia, where there's a large African-American population, so that hits on the slide we just spoke about. But what about Arizona and Nevada? Those are the states where 20+% of likely voters are Hispanic. And look here, it's the same trend line among Hispanics at this point in 2020 versus at this point in 2024 right now. Biden still leads, but those leads have shrunk significantly by somewhere between 20 and 30 percentage points. I have never seen anything like this, Aaron, and I'm left asking the question, either one, we're on our way to a major realignment, or two, pollsters have gotten something very, very wrong.
Well, we will get there. We will get there because I believe that African-American voters who have stood up for the Democratic Party time and time again recognize that they are probably the only voters that really stand between the future of democracy and further elections versus autocratic government, authoritarian government.
Well, we will see, but those numbers certainly are stunning, and we're going to be talking about that.
I think so.
Where are we talking about that? All right, thank you both. And out front next, he was America's ambassador to Russia under Trump. Now, though, he has been banned. Ambassador John Sullivan is next. And former President Trump now threatening to deport Prince Harry if he's reelected. How come? Tonight, the U.S. losing to Putin, more than 1,000 U.S. military personnel getting kicked out of Niger, an essential military agreement falling apart. Niger, once a major American ally, turning instead to Putin. Russia has been feverishly working to expand its presence, not just in Niger, but across all of Africa, mineral-rich and many, many countries, with one top U.S. military official warning that several African nations are, quote, at the tipping point of falling under Russia's influence. Out front now, John Sullivan, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. And Ambassador, we have seen this in countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, across Africa. Now you've got 1,000 Americans kicked out of Niger, a 10-year deal over. This was a crucial location for U.S. troops, counter-terror efforts. Putin now gaining ground. Can you explain why this matters so much?
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. It's great to be with you. Yeah, this has been a longstanding problem that the Russians, through their proxy organizations like the Wagner Group, have been working to ingratiate themselves into these countries. It undermines the United States counterterrorism mission. It allows them to expropriate the natural resources of these countries, valuable natural resources, gold, including some that are essential for U.S. national security, like uranium. In Niger, for example. So it's a national security problem for the United States, but it's even bigger problem for all the people who live in these countries, whose autocratic governments are now associating with what amounts to a private military contractor / terrorist organization like the Wagner Group.
And you mentioned the Wagner Group. You know, before Prigozhin was killed in that plane crash, after his attempted coup, you know, we had marched half of the way to Moscow. He and his mercenary army were, you know, deeply involved in Africa, right? That was where he had actually gotten so much of his money, from all of the minerals and all of the deals that he did, natural resources, weapons running. And can you tell me how active they still are, the Wagner Group, and what are the mercenaries? How are they getting mercenaries there?
Well, Aaron, it's really like a franchise, the way to think of it. The Wagner organization, we call it Wagner, it was really a bunch of corporate shell companies that recruited Russian military, other military personnel to go in and provide security services to autocrats in these countries. The franchise founder has been eliminated by Vladimir Putin, and now they're recruiting more military personnel to go in and undermine security, undermine the counterterrorism mission in these countries, support autocrats, and undermine the West.
So former President Trump has just done an interview with Nigel Farage of the UK, and they talk about Vladimir Putin, specifically Trump's relationship with Putin, and how Trump says things would be very different if he were president right now. I wanted to play the exchange for you, Ambassador.
Is Putin the kind of man we can negotiate with?
Yeah, I think he is.
Do you?
So we did very well with him. Look, you know, I'm the one that was the one, I stopped the pipeline, Nord Stream 2. People don't realize that. You know, they say, I like Putin. I got along with Putin great.
Putin responds to strength.
I don't know. I don't know what he responds to. He responded to me.
Ambassador, you are one of the few now who in these past years have seen Putin and Trump up close. So what do you think about this right now? Is Vladimir Putin right now the kind of person anyone can negotiate with?
Well, I think former President Trump's approach to Putin, like his approach to other world leaders, was highly personal. He wanted to engage in personal diplomacy, develop a relationship with world leaders, including Putin, even when it was inconsistent with longstanding U.S. foreign policy and national security policy. His rationale was that he could develop a relationship and then do good things for the United States. But a leader like Putin can't be manipulated that way. And President Trump thought that he could develop this personal relationship, and it just wouldn't work. Didn't work then, won't work in the future.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. And next, another photo taken by Kate Middleton, doctored, a professional photographer who knows exactly what was changed. We'll show you next. Tonight, another doctored photo taken by Kate Middleton. This after footage of the royal has emerged, leading to more speculation and wild conspiracy theories. And now Getty Images placing an editorial advisory on this second photo, which we've got up here on the screen. That's the picture of Queen Elizabeth with 10 of her grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, shot in 2022. CNN analysis finding signs that it was altered in as many as 19 places. 19. So Nick Watt is out front to show you exactly what changed.
Getty Images now says this pic, taken by Kate, Duchess of Cambridge, released last year, of the Queen and the grandkids and the great-grandkids was, quote, digitally enhanced at source.
A hot spot here and then another hot spot here. That lighting is weird to me. To capture a photo of children this young, all looking at the camera and all smiling, is very difficult. 60 to 70% chance I would be switching ahead here and there.
Kate earlier admitted to amateur editing of this recent smiley snap before it was released.
There's a sort of wrist cardigan situation over here.
If one of the folds was bulging out, then she would have liquefied it and it would have distorted her hand.
So what? It's just a little Photoshop. Well, number one, we're told Kate is recovering from surgery. Hadn't been seen since Christmas, fueling breathless, bonkers conspiracy theories. The fudged photo supersized the breathlessness.
There is some suggestion that Kate is sort of indisposed, and it's a complete fabrication, and it's super sinister.
I guess that's possible, but if somebody were this good as a retoucher to make it look this natural, they would have perfected the imperfections. They wouldn't have done a bad job on the cloning of the jacket.
Number two, the Royal Press Shop is usually pretty slick, imposing rules on how we commoners can use official royal photos. No cropping or photoshopping. So why are they now engaged in such amateurish jiggery pokery?
Let's just say this one's hysterically crying. You know, he's looking off and blinked. You would have to answer the question whether that's, you know, not photojournalistic integrity, because if this was a photo that was 20 shots were taken in exactly the same place in a matter of a minute, and you switch two heads for smiles, how unethical is that?
You're not changing the narrative.
History, you're not changing the narrative.
Journalistically, Jordan, ethical to do that?
No.
You wouldn't do that?
No, not at all.
You wouldn't do that, okay.
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Number three, public images almost all the royals have left. They don't do a lot of actual ruling. It's mostly shaking hands, opening supermarkets and stuff, and just looking great. So an image dent, a collapse of trust, is a big deal for what is essentially an anachronistic institution that survives on goodwill.
Maybe she should have an in-house retoucher?
The Sun newspaper just published some of the first images of Kate in the wild this year. Then the Telegraph ran a story alleging it's not Kate, but a look-alike. Is trust eroding? That's the of it all.
And Aaron, in that interview you just mentioned, Donald Trump's weighing in. He's on Team Kate. He also said that Prince Harry might get deported for lying on his visa application should Donald Trump return to the White House. Anyway, listen, the royal family has been essentially retouching for centuries. Henry VIII was undoubtedly uglier in real life than he was in those beautiful portraits. You just can't get away with it anymore. Palace has said Kate's going to be out and about again at Easter, 10 days from now. Let's see if she comes out, does a little dance. Maybe everyone will stop getting their bloomers in a bunch about all this, but I doubt it.
Yeah, you
Erin?
never know. It's hard to go back. Thank you so much, Nick Watt, and thanks so much to all of you for being with us. AC 360 starts now.
Tonight on 360, breaking news in a stunning brief to the Supreme Court. The former president asked to be put beyond the reach of the law for January 6 and his actions leading up to it. Also tonight, good news on crime. New data showing something you wouldn't know from the headlines. Violent crime down across the country and murder down sharply. Plus, more twists in the royal photo flap. A new video appears and an old photo was likely doctored. And more questions about what is going on with the royals. Good evening. Thanks for joining us today. The former president of the United States asked the Supreme Court for absolute immunity from charges connected to his attempt to overturn the election he lost. Not granting him that, he warned, would be, quote, the end of the presidency as we know it. Continuing from his brief, quote, as the recent history of impeachment demonstrates, once our nation crosses this Rubicon, every future president will face de facto blackmail and extortion while in office and will be harassed by politically motivated prosecution after leaving office over his most sensitive and controversial decisions. Now, we should point out here that this has never happened to a former president before this one, and there's no evidence it's happening now to him. Yet, that dubious idea, which a lower court unanimously rejected, is now central to a sweeping invitation for the court to set precedent for generations to come, a call for overturning the common sense notion that no president is beyond accountability. something the founders certainly believed. And 2 centuries later, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell gave as his reason for not holding the former president accountable after January 6.
We have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation. And former presidents are not immune from being accountable by either one.
Well, unless, of course, this former president gets what he wants from the Supreme Court. More on all of this now from CNN's Evan Perez, who joins us now. So what stands out in this filing, Evan?
Well, Anderson, this is designed to appeal to the conservative justices who have this expansive view of the power of the presidency. I'll read you just a part of what the Trump lawyers say in this filing. They say a former president enjoys absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for his official acts. Criminal immunity arises directly from the executive vesting clause and the separation of powers. They go on to say that the impeachment judgment clause reflects the founders' understanding that only a president convicted by the Senate after impeachment could be criminally prosecuted. Of course, obviously, Anderson, that is referring directly to that episode that you just played from Mitch McConnell, which is, during the impeachment proceeding, the Trump lawyers argued that you could leave it for the criminal justice system to take care of this issue that the president was being accused of. And of course, now they're arguing the opposite. They're saying that first you have to be impeached and convicted by the Senate before you can actually take any kind of criminal action against the former president. This argument also, Anderson, is designed also to remind Brett Kavanaugh of some of his own writings. They point out that in the past he has pointed out that a president who was concerned with being criminally prosecuted is inevitably going to do a worse job, designed again to appeal to that core conservative group on the Supreme Court.
And is it clear when Special Counsel Jack Smith may respond to this?
Yeah, the Supreme Court has already set those deadlines. April 8th is when the government is due to respond. Of course, there's going to be another set of filings after that. And then the oral arguments are set for April 25th. And we're anticipating that Jack Smith and his team are going to go back to the thing that you just opened with, which is that no president, no one under our system is supposed to be above the law, which is what President Trump and his former President Trump and his legal team are arguing here.
Evan Perez, appreciate it. Thank you. Joining us now is former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who served on the House January 6th committee. Also CNN legal analyst Jennifer Rogers and Maggie Haberman, senior political correspondent for the New York Times. Maggie, let's start out with you. I mean, first of all, what do you make of this latest filing? Not a surprise.
No, it's a continuation of an argument that they've used several times, perhaps more emphatically right now. I think that the Brett Kavanaugh writing is very intentionally done. We know this is a former president who has talked repeatedly in private about being unhappy with the Supreme Court justices who he appointed because they haven't sided with him in his election lies previously. Brett Kavanaugh is somebody who came under a lot of scrutiny and a lot of attack during his confirmation process, and I don't think that that's a coincidence that they're using this. But look, they are looking toward oral argument, and they are looking toward how the justices are going to respond to it. And it is not especially concerning to them that, as Evan noted, they are taking contradictory positions. In one filing, they say, well, he wasn't impeached. And then in another, they say, well, during impeachment, they say the criminal justice system is where this should be dealt with. I don't think we can underscore enough how consequential Mitch McConnell's speech was that day, not because he was so hard on Trump, but because of what he chose not to do, which was not to vote to convict and not to whip other Republicans to do the same.
And Jennifer, I mean, Trump's lawyers, I want to read what he said. Let's put it on the screen. He said, their lawyer said, if immunity is not recognized, every future president will be forced to grapple with the prospect of possibly being criminally prosecuted after leaving office every time he or she makes a politically controversial decision. That would be the end of the presidency as we know it and would irreparably damage our republic. What do you make of that? I mean, what do you expect the Supreme Court to do here?
Yeah, well, except that
this has never happened before. No president has ever faced that concern before because no other president has done this before. Listen, I think that the court is going to look at his argument for absolute immunity, which is the argument that he has to make here, right? He can't really make a more nuanced argument about, well, all of these things I did were part of my official duties as president, and therefore I should be protected in the way that he could if he, say, ordered a drone strike and some DA somewhere tried to prosecute him or something. What he did as a candidate for his own personal benefit and his political benefit, not for his job as a president in the country. And that's why he has to go big on this argument for absolute immunity. And he has to raise this specter of, oh, if you do this, everyone's going to be prosecuted after this. Well, no one has been prosecuted before in the history of our country. No one who lives within the bounds of the law while they're president will be prosecuted again. This is really about his actions, and because those actions are outside of any reasonable scope of what the president is supposed to be doing, I think the court will have to set a standard that is below absolute immunity, for sure.
So, and Congressman, if former presidents can't be prosecuted, why did Gerald Ford pardon Richard Nixon? Also by the Trump team's logic, every president could go on a crime spree the last morning of his term, and Congress wouldn't have time to impeach and convict, so he could never be prosecuted.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's a logical conclusion. You could do that. A president could form a militia. He could, order the military to overthrow Congress. Like, there's any number of horror stories that we can think of a president could theoretically do with absolute immunity. And the only way he would ever be left out of power is if he failed at his illegal action. If he succeeded, of course, he'd just stay in power at that point. So the logical conclusion of this is, I don't think there's a chance in the world the Supreme Court finds in favor of Trump. But the other thing I ask is, let's do what I literally just thought of and created the Biden test, okay? So if Joe Biden could do what Donald Trump is saying he wants to do, would that side believe that immunity would exist? For instance, when they argued that a president could, in theory, have SEAL Team 6 go after his political rival. Are they saying Joe Biden could do that? Well, of course, they'd say no to that. And so everybody has to be held to the same standard. If the Biden test doesn't pass, then there's no way that that Trump should be able to get away with what he tried and did.
And Maggie, Trump's lawyers, they invoked the drone strikes by President Obama, Middle East airstrikes launched by President Clinton around the time of the Monica Lewinsky scandal as examples of conduct they thought could have been prosecuted. And then they write, in all of these instances, the president's political opponents routinely accuse him and currently accuse President Biden of criminal behavior in his official acts. In each such case, those opponents later came to power with ample incentive to charge him.
The Biden example is really strange, considering that example about Biden is being made primarily by Trump and by people connected to Trump. What they're trying to say with the President Clinton and President Obama arguments is basically that there is no such thing as an official act that isn't political, that you can't divorce one from the other. And I expect you will hear them make a version of that before the Supreme Court. I don't know how compelling it'll be, because when they tried going down this road in the lower court, one of the questions that came up was, what if there was ordering a SEAL 6 team to go assassinate a political rival? And that got into a cul-de-sac that I'm not sure the Trump lawyers wanted to be in. So you can argue yourself in one direction or another here, but I don't think that any rational person thinks that drone strikes are the same. And they will try to suggest they were because he was talking to his vice president, but there is so much else that comprises what he's been indicted for in connection with January 6th.
And Jennifer, the Trump team also floated this idea that if the Supreme Court refused to grant him full immunity, the case could be sent back to the lower courts. How much would that delay things?
Yeah, well, if they did what he wants them to do, it would delay things substantially, which is go back for some sort of factual finding and application of the new test to this case and then come back up on appeal inevitably. But they don't need to do that here. We're not at a stage where there's factual findings to be had except for the trial itself. They have the indictment. At this stage of the game, the indictment is taken as these are the facts we're working with, and they have the law, the Constitution, as they're going to evaluate this immunity argument up against the Constitution. So the lower courts can't do anything more than they can do, in other words. So there's no need to send it back for anything other than the trial itself. And that's what his argument is missing. He wants another spring back and forth to delay things a number of months again, really till next term in the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court won't fall for that. There's no fact-finding to be done.
And Congressman, it's important to point out that there is a lot at stake here in this ruling.
Oh, there's a lot at stake. I mean, not just in terms of what it means for this election. I mean, obviously, if the Supreme Court comes back with what we expect and say you don't have absolute immunity, then potentially this trial will proceed. But it has a huge deal of at stake if they come back and say there is such thing as unlimited immunity. I don't see how the presidency and frankly how democracy can continue if you have a bad actor in place that literally can get away with anything so long as he or she has the title of president in front of their name. And so this is a very important thing for the Supreme Court to take up. It may be why they decided to take this up after the appellate court, but they're going to have to make their stamp, and hopefully it comes out 9-0, potentially 8-1, but it's going to be a resounding defeat for Trump, I think.
Adam Kinzinger, thank you. Jennifer Rogers, Maggie Haberman as well. As the former president was arguing for immunity, one of his former top advisors, Peter Navarro, faced accountability, the first of 4 months' worth in federal prison for defying a congressional subpoena. In his last moments of freedom, the man who once spoke from the North Lawn of the White House and the White House briefing room railed at reporters from a strip mall parking lot. Details now from Randy Kay.
Every person who has taken me on this road to that prison is a friggin' Democrat and a Trump hater.
That's former Trump White House advisor Peter Navarro, minutes before he turned himself in to federal prison in Miami, as the first former White House official to be imprisoned for a contempt of Congress conviction.
When I walk in that prison today, the justice system, such as it is, will have done a crippling blow to the constitutional separation of powers and executive privilege.
Navarro was convicted in September after refusing to comply with a subpoena from the House Select Committee, which investigated the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Liz Cheney, who was vice chair of the panel, said Navarro would have been a witness.
In America, no one is above the law. Every citizen has a duty to comply with a subpoena.
Navarro argues he was bound by executive privilege, a defense that's been rejected in court.
Do you wish you had shown up for testimony and asserted privilege in person?
If I had gone to Congress and played the piecemeal game with them, I would have done damage to the separation of powers, and I would not have been doing my duty. I would not have been obeying my oath of office.
In his final minutes as a free man, Navarro continued to paint himself as a victim.
I'm pissed. That's what I'm feeling right now. All I have done is my duty to this country.
Just last week, Navarro asked the Supreme Court to intervene and allow him to remain free while he challenged his conviction. The High Court rejected his last-minute bid on Monday. Navarro has never been able to show that executive privilege would have applied in his case. The prison where Navarro will serve his time is one of the oldest prison camps in the country. While Navarro has complained about financial problems, the prison consultant he hired to make his time more comfortable inside told CNN that the 74-year-old will be housed in an air-conditioned dormitory for elderly male inmates. The consultant said Navarro will have access to television, email, and be able to make phone calls, and he'll be expected to take classes and get a job. He'll likely also be able to hear the roar of the lions from the zoo next door. As Peter Navarro headed off to officially turn himself in, he left us with this.
God bless you all. I'll see you on the other side.
Randy joins me now from outside the prison. Did he say whether he had talked to Donald Trump before heading to prison?
Anderson, he was asked about that at the news conference, and once again he claimed executive privilege. He would not say whether or not he had any conversations recently with the former president, though he did say he believes he has former President Trump's full support. He also said that while in prison, he believes that one of the things that will keep him going and give him strength is knowing that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee. But it is worth noting, Anderson, that according to this prison consultant who has been working with Peter Navarro, he told CNN that it's very unlikely he will serve his full 4-month sentence. He said it's more likely he'll serve about 90 days because there are laws in place that allow for early release for federal inmates. Anderson.
All right, Randy Kay, thanks very much. Coming up next, polls closed a short time ago in Ohio. Tell you what exit polling shows about the key U.S. Senate race there and how that might bear on the presidential race in November. Also, some good news on crime. Former NYPD Deputy Commissioner John Miller on new FBI numbers showing crime is down sharply, even as some candidates paint the opposite picture. More breaking news tonight. Polls closed a short time ago in Ohio, and though the presidential outcome there is now academic, who wins the Republican Senate primary could play a key part in who controls the Senate next year. CNN Jeff Zeleny is in Columbus, Ohio for us, and our political director, David Chalian, is in Washington with new exit polling. So, David, first of all, the exit polling, what's it saying?
Yeah, Anderson, I mean, these exit polls give us insight into sort of how this Republican primary electorate in Ohio sort of sorts itself. One of the key questions we've been tracking all primary season is asking Republican primary voters, do you believe that Joe Biden legitimately won the 2020 election? We know the answer to that is yes, but if you look here, among Republican primary voters in that key Senate primary, Anderson, only a third say yes. 32% here say yes. 63% wrongly say no, he did not legitimately win. That larger group, take a look at how they split in this Republican Senate primary. They overwhelmingly, if you look here, go for Bernie Moreno, the Trump-backed candidate, over Matt Dolan. So Moreno wins 58% of the so-called election deniers, the bigger group of voters here, to Matt Dolan's 24%, Frank LaRose at 18% with these voters. If you look at the reverse, those that do believe correctly that Joe Biden was legitimately elected, remember, a smaller group, just a third, and you see that Matt Dolan does much better with those voters. Again, he's the establishment-backed candidate. He gets 63% of those who say Biden was legitimately elected. Trump's candidate, Bernie Moreno, only gets 20% of those voters, Anderson.
And Jeff, what's the sense of where this Senate primary is headed tonight?
Well, that certainly is the divide that David laid out there. There is a sense this is a establishment versus MAGA primary, and of course we've seen these play out, through the era of Trump for year after year. We will see what the Ohio result is tonight. But Matt Dolan, the state senator, he is backed by Ohio Governor Mike DeWine and former Senator Rob Portman. Moreno, for his part, is backed by Donald Trump and Senator J.D. Vance and others. But Anderson, beyond this establishment MAGA divide in politics, there's a stark policy difference as well. And this is something that really has emerged in the final days of this race. Governor DeWine has been urging, in fact, imploring Republicans to look at the policy differences, specifically on things like Ukraine, on funding for Ukraine. Ohio has a very large Ukrainian population, and this was once a central issue. Now in this MAGA movement, if you will, the funding for Ukraine is very much uncertain. So the policy differences here also are so stark. Is Ohio going to completely change in the way of the Trump era like J.D. Vance, or will the establishment wing, if you will, hold on a bit in the vein of Senator Rob Portman or Governor DeWine? So yes, there are political differences, but the policy differences here also are significant.
Yeah, David, how do you see it? I mean, if the Trump-backed candidate wins in Ohio, what does that mean for the more establishment Republicans there?
That their time being the dominant force in the Republican Party is over, Anderson. I mean, it's not reflective of the party anymore. You're looking there at the vote totals in this current race. We've got about roughly 19% of the estimated vote in, and you see it's a pretty close race there, 38.9% to 38.3%. I just want to note here, Anderson, the vast majority of this vote that is already in is pre-election vote. It's early absentee vote. So, as we know, sort of Trump-aligned forces tend to show up on Election Day itself. So if Bernie Moreno is benefiting from Trump's backing here, it would make sense that as more Election Day vote comes in, he may see his numbers grow. Right now, you're looking at all early absentee vote. But to your point, that establishment wing of the party, if indeed they come up short here yet again, as they did throughout the presidential primary season, as they have in so many primaries, it will just be yet another sign. This is Donald Trump's Republican primary, and his supporters are the dominant force inside of it.
Jeff, I mean, there are some Democrats who think that a candidate aligned with the former president would be easier to beat in November. That strategy worked for them in 2022. What are the chances it works in Ohio this time around?
We'll certainly see. I mean, that's where the three-dimensional chess comes in, if you will. In the final days of this race, a super PAC that's aligned with the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer weighed in on this race with some $3 million in ads or so, promoting Bernie Moreno, tying him to Donald Trump, trying to elevate him. They believe he will be the easier candidate to win in the fall. That's very much an open question in this presidential election year. Sherrod Brown has been on the ballot as a senator 3 times. The only time in a presidential year was 2012 when he was running with Barack Obama, who won the state of Ohio. There is no doubt for Senator Brown, to win, he has to win many Trump voters. So that is the obstacle course here. But Democrats believe that Moreno will be the weaker candidate in November. That's why they tried to prop him up at the end. So one of the many dynamics going on here, we've seen Democrats be successful in meddling in these Republican primaries. We'll see if they are again tonight and in November.
David, how concerned do you think the Trump campaign should be about where Nikki Haley's support level is tonight, even though she suspended her campaign 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, Anderson, we're not very focused on the presidential primary because it's over. But if you look at the vote board right now, and you noted Nikki Haley's been out of this race for 2 weeks now. She's pulling roughly, the last time I checked, 20% of the vote. There you go, 21.9% of the vote, 22% of the estimated vote in. Nikki Haley sitting there at 22% of the vote. She's not even campaigning. She hasn't had any ads. She's not a candidate. So it represents that there is still this faction, a small faction, inside the Republican electorate that is just consistently resistant to Donald Trump. So as he, as the nominee now, the presumptive nominee of his party, heads into this general election season, part of his mission is to get a big swath of those Haley voters back on board with his campaign so that he has a unified Republican Party taking on Joe Biden this fall.
David Chalian, Jeff Zeleny, thanks. Now, significant progress and a problem that voters are hearing plenty about from candidates this year, especially the former president, crime. New FBI data showing it fell significantly last year, almost across the board. Property crime mostly down, violent crime also down, murder down sharply. Today, President Biden touted the new numbers, took a jab at the former president over his record in office, and promised to keep fighting for police funding and a ban on assault weapons. We're now to talk more about this, CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller. So, John, I mean, the Biden administration is certainly celebrating these numbers. How substantial of a drop in crime is this?
Well, it's pretty substantial. I mean, you've got like a 13% decrease in murder, shootings going down. We are not yet back to pre-pandemic numbers, but we're on the way. And that's important because pre-pandemic numbers, particularly in violent crime, were some of the lowest ever. That doesn't mean, and we check the FBI stats against the major city chiefs, that there aren't certain cities that are still having big challenges, particularly with shootings.
But why? I mean, is there a sense of why violent crime is down?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at kind of the graphics of the whole thing, you have 2018, 2019 crime is very low in the United States, lowest it's been in, many, many years. But then in 2020, you've got the pandemic. You've got courts being shut down. You've got Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. You've got demonstrations and disorder. You have police stopping, making arrests in certain cases. You've got defund the police. You have a lot of things coming together in almost a perfect storm that we saw a surge in crime in those 2 years. Then when you look at 2022, 2023, you see some of those cities have refunded police, rehired officers. The court backlogs are now kind of back to normal. You see some of the laws that were sweeping have been adjusted and fixed so that the criminal justice system works smoother. And you see that crime goes flat, and now we see it starting to go down again.
Why do you think there is such a discrepancy between the way people feel or the way it's being portrayed and, I mean, these numbers? Because there's plenty of people, I mean, I look around New York and think, wow, things seem pretty
it's a real discrepancy. If you look at the surveys that have done either by Pew Research and the Gallup polls, they'll tell you consistently that if you ask people, is gun crime, gun violence, violent crime better now or worse than it was 20 years ago? They'll say, no, it's gotten much worse 30 years ago. We know 30 years ago, there were 24,000 murders across the United States. Now that's down between 15 and 18, depending on what year you're looking at. But the perception is it's worse, partly because of us. Now we have almost instantaneous access to very dramatic video from people's cell phones.
See it more, even though it may not be as...
We talk about the active shooters, and of course the politics of it is, some politicians, and we were just talking about that, reinforce the idea as ever-rising crime when, in fact, it's way down from what it used to be, and it's starting to get back to where it was at its lowest.
But that's so fascinating to me that because we have more information and cameras are more ubiquitous, we see it more and it makes us feel...
Well, it has a psychological effect.
It's interesting.
And, it's not just us. It's social media, too. People are getting that feed from the Citizen app and all those other things. It's a lot of input, and and affects people.
John Miller, thank you. Coming up, possibly another doctored royal photo, and it comes as Princess Catherine and Prince William were spotted together in public. You see the video there, smiling, happy. Details ahead. With concern building over a major Israeli offensive into Rafah, a city in southern Gaza, one of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's closest confidants, plus his national security advisor, will soon head to Washington to meet with U.S. officials. The White House expects the meeting early next week. This comes a day after President Biden and Netanyahu spoke by phone about the offensive. The White House has continually pressed Israel on its plans for how to safeguard the more than 1 million displaced Palestinians now living in the south of Gaza. Today, the World Health Organization says it's seeing a growing number of infants on the brink of death. Jeremy Diamond has more on some children who've been in an Israeli hospital who are now actually being sent back to Gaza.
Little Sarah is barely 6 months old. Born in East Jerusalem, all she knows is the safety of this hospital room. This week, that will be torn away. War will become her new reality. I might go back and they invade Rafah, her mother Nima says. I'll be the one responsible for anything that harms them. If I go back with the twins, where do I go with them? Where would I get diapers and milk? Gaza is not the same anymore. For nearly 6 months, these 3 mothers have been living, sleeping, and nursing their 5 babies in this hospital room together. Before the war, their high-risk pregnancies made them eligible to leave Gaza and give birth in Jerusalem hospitals. But now they've packed their bags. The Israeli government is sending them back to Gaza, where Israel's brutal military campaign has made survival a daily struggle. Hanan, the mother of twins, says she's scared of going back to Gaza without a ceasefire. There are diseases spreading, infections, she says. It's not a normal life. They will be among the 22 Palestinians set to be bused to the Kerem Shalom crossing in the south. But her husband is in the north, and Hanan is still trying to find a place to live. Despite that uncertainty, Asma wants to return to Gaza. My daughter is there. She needs me, Asma says. Every time she speaks to me, she asks when I'm coming back. Every time there's an airstrike, children go to hug their mothers. And mine has no one to hug. At nearby Augusta Victoria Hospital, nearly 50 Gazan cancer patients have been receiving treatment since before October 7th. Watching from afar as their families endure the horrors of war. For Mohammed, one of the 10 who are in remission and being sent back to Gaza, being far away from his son Hamza, who is blind, has been the hardest to bear. But going back is also terrifying. I'm torn, he says. The only wish I have in life is to go back home. I regret even coming here for treatment. I wish I could be with them because I know how they need me. In a statement, the Israeli agency in charge of their return said patients who have received medical treatment and who are not in need of further medical care are returned to the Gaza Strip. After more than 2 months of pushing back on Israeli demands, Dr. Fadi Atrash says he was ordered to compile a list of patients to be sent back to Gaza this week.
We don't want to send them, but it's not our call at the end of the day.
Now he fears for his patients.
All the support, all the efforts that we have been putting to try to cure them or to put them in a good condition or to improve their quality of life will be lost because there is no care in Gaza. There is no hospitals, there is no health care. The system is totally destroyed.
The mothers are preparing for their journey. They've bought sweets and toys for the children who are waiting for them. If they want to throw away all my belongings, they can, but not this bag for my daughter. It is all they can bring for the children who have endured so much in 6 months, and the babies who will soon learn the reality of war. Far too young.
And Jeremy, what is the Israeli government's reason for sending the patients back to Gaza, or their stated reason?
Well, Anderson, Israeli officials say that these patients were brought to Jerusalem in order to receive treatment, and they say that now that treatment has been completed, they must go back to Gaza, despite the fact that the war is still very much ongoing. Red Cross officials, I'm told, visited the hospital today, but there is still no clear plan for who or if anyone will actually meet these patients and these mothers and their babies on the other side of the border once they cross into Gaza. Instead, what awaits them is uncertainty and potentially a 3-mile walk all the way to Rafah, that key southern city in Gaza. All of this walking with their babies, with their luggages and everything that they have brought with them. All of this, of course, as there is major uncertainty about what will happen in Rafah, with the Israeli Prime Minister vowing that he is determined to send Israeli troops there. Anderson.
Jeremy Diamond, thanks. Coming up next, Catherine, Princess of Wales, seen on video for the first time since her surgery. The footage was not released by the royal family, even as another older photo is found to have allegedly been manipulated. Details ahead. New video has surfaced of Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Prince William out for a stroll. It's the first video since her surgery in January. It arrives with her and the royal family embroiled in controversy, obviously, over the manipulated family photo that recently came out. More tonight from CNN's royal correspondent Max Foster.
Smiling, happy, and seemingly healthy. New video not sanctioned by the palace, but reassuring royalists that the couple are well. British tabloids also celebrating Kate's re-emergence and apparent recovery from surgery.
So it's good to see that she's back, and hopefully she's doing well.
I'm sure that it'll be quite nice for her to walk around, do some shopping with her husband.
I don't really have any doubts. I don't know. Just a bit of a weird one, isn't it?
Weird because of the conspiracy theories that have swamped social media in recent weeks, filling a void of information from the palace. And the video did nothing to quell them, as it was accused of being fake. Trust in any royal imagery undermined, in part, by Kensington Palace itself, after it sent out not one but 2 doctored photos to the news media, both taken by the princess. Kate's edited Mother's Day photo, manipulated in several places. And now this one, released last year, which Getty Images has now labelled digitally enhanced. CNN found inconsistencies in several spots, such as a misalignment on the Queen's skirt and blanket. Strands of Princess Charlotte's hair appear to have been cloned, and Prince Louis's shoulder is blurred, overlapping the background. Getty told CNN in a statement it's reviewing all so-called royal handout images and placing, where relevant, an editor's note saying it could have been digitally enhanced.
William and Kate, Kensington Palace was so trusted at Christmas. And now, 3 months later, we have a situation in which whatever photo is put out, people don't believe it.
The lack of information coming from the palace about the princess has created conspiracy theories, often wild ones, which get worse when the palace has been found to be manipulating images.
Either they should have said nothing and kept with that, just as they said they were not going to say anything until there were significant updates, or they should have put out a few little statements, perhaps a little statement from Kate saying thank you for the lovely cards, and kept people updated to a degree.
Seemingly unfazed and in good spirits, royals refusing to be distracted in public. Prince William making a long-planned visit to a homelessness project in Sheffield. No lack of support there, or from the papers, as the rumours continue online.
And Max Foster joins us now, along with Kate Williams, who was just in Max's report. She's CNN's royal historian. So, Kate, I mean, if the prince and princess are out shopping at their local farm shop, why wouldn't the palace, given all this intrigue, have made some sort of a video of them? Or why wouldn't she have made some sort of a statement? Does it make sense?
Yes, this is what people are saying. They're saying if she's okay to go out walking at the farm shop, which is great to see, then why can't we have a little statement from her? So far, the only thing we've heard from Kate is her saying about the editing of that infamous Mother's Day photo that she liked to play with Photoshop. I think most of us didn't believe that it was her who edited the photo. So people are raising these questions. And you know, Anderson, the Queen said, you have to be seen to be believed. That's what Queen Elizabeth said. But now people don't really seem to believe any photo. In fact, I was looking at a newspaper article about the farm shop photo, and there were 9,000 comments, and the majority were saying they don't believe this photo either. So I really do think that the royals do have to, Kate does have to, I think, put out a photo or perhaps a little video, just like the King did in February, saying thank you so much for all these get well soon cards, because the conspiracy theories are still going on.
Max, I mean, does this video at this market make sense to you?
It does make sense. I mean, they do go there, and it was taken by another shopper, and it's definitely them. It's certainly helped the palace. I mean, they're not sanctioning it being released, but it certainly helped them because it reinforces their message that she is well. They have a long, tradition of communications. It pretty much goes back centuries. They don't respond to speculation, and they're sticking to it. They've got a plan. They're only going to update people when there is an update to come. And they are now caught in this storm, which is pretty unprecedented for royal reporting, and in many ways all reporting, because it's blown up in such an extraordinary way. And we've seen how it continues and gets even bigger when they don't respond. So it is an issue for the palace, but there is some strategy here, despite the fact many people are completely bemused by what they're not doing, as it were.
So, Kate, how common would you say it is for photos released by the royal family to be changed or digitally enhanced? I mean, the idea that, in public these days, so many photos have some sort of touch-up.
Yes, so many photos do, but there is a big difference, isn't there, Anderson, between photos one puts on one's own Instagram and photos one's give to official agencies such as AFP and Getty. And it's really quite stunning to hear that Getty is now going to go through all royal handout photos, wondering whether they've been doctored. Because, the royals have doctored since the beginning of time. Henry VIII didn't look anything like his portraits, or Elizabeth I, and they all doctor them in. There's a great one of Henry VIII with his son and the wife who died in childbirth, but she's looking greater, the son is 10. So they've always done this throughout history, and William and Kate have also doctored quite a lot of photos in the past. We saw the Christmas photo with a missing finger for Louis, and no one minded before. They just thought it was sort of spot the difference. But in the middle of all these conspiracy theories, it just set everyone off. And now I think it's very concerning for Kensington Palace, because you have AFP saying that there is same levels of trustworthiness as the agencies of North Korea and Iran. And that means there's a long way of trust to get back.
Max, was there a difference in how the palace handled King Charles's medical issues versus Princess Kate's?
Yeah, he is the monarch, and we have a greater right to information about him. So they are deliberately issuing lots of images without the details around his actual health. I just think that Kensington Palace feels, and Prince William in particular feels, that Kate isn't on the throne yet, so she does have a bigger right to privacy.
And Kate, at this point, is there anything the royal family can do to regain some of the public trust that may have been lost?
I think that they can do a lot. I think that what William is doing now, going out and about doing engagements, which he wasn't doing before, mentioning his wife. He said, my wife should be here to hear this today at his engagement about young persons' homelessness. That's very important. And I think we probably will see some kind of picture or statement of Kate quite soon.
Well, I hope so. Kate Williams, Max Foster, thanks so much. Just ahead, you may have seen the headlines about intermittent fasting and a new study that suggests a type of intermittent fasting may be dangerous for your health. We'll talk to a cardiologist about it next. Time-restricted eating, a kind of intermittent fasting, is said to help a person lose weight and improve cardiovascular health. But now a study presented at a meeting of the American Heart Association says the opposite, that an 8-hour window for eating and 16 hours not eating is not just bad, that it could actually increase risk of death from cardiovascular disease by 91%. And if you already have cardiovascular disease, your risk of dying from heart disease and stroke increases by 66%. The question is that actually true? Joining me now is CNN medical analyst Dr. Jonathan Reiner, director of the Cardiac Catheterization Lab at George Washington University Hospital. Dr. Reiner, good to have you on. So there's a lot of headlines about this study today. I've done intermittent fasting over the last couple of years, off and on. What do we know and what do we not know at this point?
Yeah, hi, Anderson. This study is very provocative, but really not that convincing. So this is what we know about intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. There are basically three forms of that. Sometimes people will fast 2 days out of the week. Some people alternate eating one day and fasting another day. And the particular kind of time-restricted eating in this study is a form where people basically restrict their eating to a certain number of consecutive hours in a given day. And in this particular study, they used 8 hours as the separation point to compare the effects of this strategy. And they looked at a large national database called NHANES, which is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Study. And they looked at 20,000 patients who self-reported their eating habits. Now, importantly, not all of the people who described limiting their eating to a certain number of consecutive hours in a day were doing that as part of a diet. And importantly, they followed these people longitudinally for, on average, about 8 years. And unlike early studies, which were largely short-term, which looked at things like blood pressure and cholesterol and weight, this study looked at mortality. It looked at cardiovascular mortality. And in this study, the people who restricted their eating to only 8 hours out of the 24 hours, 8 hours eating, 16 hours fasting, seem to have almost a double risk of cardiovascular mortality out through 8 years. And this runs counter to everything we've sort of expected and learned about this eating strategy over the last several years, when many studies have this.
So you're saying more studies need to be done, essentially, because there's not enough known about this cohort group, that maybe it was people who weren't eating because of job or socioeconomic reasons, and that this study is not conclusive about whether or not, not eating for 16 hours a day and only eating in an 8-hour window is beneficial.
Right, there's so many, potential confounders. Perhaps the people who only eat in those 8-hour blocks have 3 jobs, and they're stopping at McDonald's, between jobs and grabbing something quick. They don't have time to eat. Perhaps the people who are time restricted, have higher blood pressure or higher cholesterol or substantial, cardiac histories or family histories.
Well, it seems like
not possible to adjust for all these confounders. Yeah.
That part of the argument that was being made about restrictive eating is that people lose muscle mass, and that as you age, losing muscle mass can cause cardiac issues. Is that? Is losing muscle mass as you age, that's a bad thing?
Yeah. That's a potential explanation for why it might have a negative effect. I think the take-home message from this trial is what we've learned early on from this strategy is that if you fast in any of these strategies, you'll lose some weight on average between 3 and 7%. And if you lose weight, you'll lower your blood pressure, you'll lower your cholesterol, and you'll lower your weight. And we know from decades of research that those effects result in good outcomes. The bottom line is this, this kind of
more needs to be studied.
Needs to be repeated, but in a prospective randomized trial.
Dr. Jonathan Reiner, appreciate it. Thank you. The news continues. The Source with Caitlin Collins starts now.
Straight from The Source tonight, a top Trump White House aide learns the price of his defiance: prison. Peter Navarro, the first senior member of Trump's inner circle to now serve time in connection to January 6th. The man who dropped him off at prison today is here with us tonight. Also, panic mode setting in for the former president and his orbit after he's facing a Monday deadline to put up nearly a $500 million bond. My new reporting tonight from inside Trump world. Also, Jared Kushner sharing his thoughts about the potential for valuable waterfront property in war-torn Gaza. I'm Caitlin Collins, and this is The Source. Tonight, 2 men who were once firmly ensconced in Donald Trump's inner circle inside the White House have chosen 2 very different paths at that fork in the road that so many people in Trump's world have often found themselves at before, either being with him or against him. One is the former Vice President Mike Pence, who may have chosen the equivalent of the political wilderness And of course, that comes after he announced that he would not be endorsing his former boss in the 2024 race, something that Trump responded to today.
I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less. We need patriots. We need strong people in our country. Our country's going downhill very fast, very rapidly. Millions of people coming across the border, coming from jails, from prisons, coming from mental institutions and insane asylums, terrorists. We need strong people in this country. We don't need weak people.
Weak people. The man that Trump himself picked to serve alongside him in the White House, the person who had his life put at risk on January 6th, is, according to Donald Trump, and what he said today as he was going to vote in Florida, weak. All because Pence said this.
The issue of fealty to the Constitution is not a small matter. I won't be endorsing Donald Trump this year.
Contrast that with Peter Navarro, who, unlike Mike Pence, did try to help Trump overturn the 2020 election by his own admission, I should note. The former White House trade advisor checked into a federal prison in Miami today to begin a 4-month stint for refusing to comply with the subpoena from the January 6th Congressional Committee. I should say that before he checked in, he gave these rambling remarks at a strip mall near a pizza place that was down the street from his new prison cell, not far from the Miami Zoo.
Every person who has taken me on this road to that prison is a friggin' Democrat and a Trump hater. I will walk proudly in there and do my time. I am not nervous. I'm pissed. That's what I'm feeling right now. They come for me, they can come for you. God bless you all. I'll see you on the other side.
As you heard from Peter Navarro there, he's really blaming everyone except himself, when, of course, he could have just gone in and testified or done what others did, showed up and taken the fifth. And I should note, he talked about Democrats there. It was Chief Justice John Roberts who denied that emergency request from Peter Navarro, which is why he did have to report to prison today. It's not like Peter Navarro has not had much to say publicly about what he was planning, what he was urging House Republicans to do to delay the certification of the votes.
I produced what would be an exhaustive 3-volume report. The plan was simply this. We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep. We were going to challenge the results of the election in the 6 battleground states. Most or all of those states would decertify the election.
He chose to go out in public and say that in interviews. He wrote about it in his memoir, but he declined to go and even plead the fifth in front of the January 6th committee. That is why Peter Navarro reported to prison today. The bottom line here and the takeaway is that Navarro is the first person in Trump's orbit to face prison or serve any time for anything related to January 6th. Of course, this is a contempt of Congress case. And of course, the big question also is what could happen to Steve Bannon. And if he loses his upcoming appeal, he could find himself in Navarro's shoes. Bannon could potentially use our first guest tonight, Sam Mangle, as a prison consultant whom Navarro brought on to help him prepare for what life is like on the inside. And Sam, it's great to have you here tonight. I know you've already spoken to Mr. Navarro since you dropped him off this morning. How did he sound?
Well, Caitlin, you have to understand that when anyone goes to prison, it's a scary, nerve-wracking experience. Entering a world where you're not used to and that you have no control over, it is very scary. You're told what time to get up, you're told what time to eat, you're told where to sleep. No matter who you are, that is certainly a very disconcerting feeling. I'm sure that Peter's settled in. I've spoken to a number of clients that I have there, and from what I've been told, he's doing fine.
Did he seem nervous at all, given what you just laid out there?
Anybody reporting to prison is nervous. I think this morning he presented himself very well, very strong. But naturally, anyone going to federal prison is going to be nervous. You lose all control. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your profile is. When you're in there, you're a number. You're an 8-digit number. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you stand for count. At 10 o'clock at night, you stand for count. When you want to use a phone, you only have 510 minutes a month. When you want to use email, it's going to be subject to being monitored. So regardless of who he is, he has to follow the same rules as everyone there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different life than what Peter Navarro has been, or anyone has been used to. I mean, and he kind of seemed to think that maybe he would get this emergency request granted by the appeals court in Washington, that he maybe wouldn't have to go. Did he seem surprised that this moment was kind of actually happening?
Since I wasn't part of his legal team, it's kind of hard for me to comment on what he might have known or how he might have acted. I know that when I picked him up this morning, he was ready to go. I was with his attorney, and he was prepared to surrender. I'm sure that he was hoping for a different outcome, like anybody would have, as a way to avoid the inevitable. But he was certainly prepared and ready to surrender.
I should note that this, for people who don't know, this is the Federal Correctional Institution in Miami. It's a low-security prison. You also previously were incarcerated there. You know what it's like to be in Peter Navarro's shoes and what he's going through. Can you just kind of walk us through? I mean, once you get inside, what happens next? What is the process on your first day there?
First, let me differentiate exactly where he is. While, yes, it is the FCI Miami, there's a satellite camp to Miami, and it's adjacent to the actual facility, the low-security facility. In a satellite camp, you're considered community custody. That means you're allowed out from 6 in the morning to roughly 9:30 at night. You're not in a cell. He's going to be in an open dorm with up to 80 other men. So there is substantially more liberty and freedom while at the camp. As long as you follow the rules and you work when you have to work, you take classes when you take classes, he will be fine and maintain that level of liberty.
Did he express interest in taking classes and doing that kind of work that's available there?
Absolutely. I think he's eager to get in. As an inmate at a camp, you're able to both teach classes to other inmates and, if required under the First Step Act, take classes. So I think somebody like him or any client that has a wealth of knowledge that they can impart on other inmates should take advantage of teaching inmates what they know, ultimately with the mindset of helping them when they get out.
I just mentioned that when you look at where this satellite campus is on a map, it's pretty close to the Miami Zoo. How close exactly is it? I mean, can you tell from being inside of there how close you are?
So when I was there, I was the first one up. I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning. They finished count at 5. At 5:30 in the morning, I was the first one up. And they have a pavilion outside where they have 3 spin bikes and a bank of televisions. I went outside in the morning to exercise. 5 o'clock in the morning or 5:30, you heard the lions. And every morning, you would hear the lions roar. So yes, you are adjacent to the zoo.
You can hear the lions roar?
You can absolutely hear the lions roar every morning.
I mean, that's kind of remarkable that that's the location that someone who was a senior White House advisor is going to be in, what he'll be experiencing. I know it's also one of the oldest prison camps in the country. What are the facilities like? What does it look like on the inside of where he'll be?
So there are 4 separate dorms. The dorms typically hold about 80 men in bunk beds. So there's 40 beds on each side. They're open dorms. So there is no privacy within the institution or within the dorm itself. You could literally look from one bed on one end of the dorm all the way down to the other, a good 75 feet down. There is obviously privacy within the bathroom and the showers, but in this dorm setting, you lack privacy, and that is typical of many of the older federal prisons.
Can I ask you, Sam, as well, because Peter Navarro, someone I knew when I was at the White House, covered when he was trade advisor, he's been very open about his struggle to pay his legal bills because they have been quite high as he's been fighting what essentially culminated today. For you specifically, does he have a backer who paid you? Did he pay you directly? How did that work?
I don't think it'd be appropriate to discuss how I was retained, but I was retained by Peter.
Okay. Sam Mangle, thank you for coming on to describe something that very few people could actually shed light on. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Also here tonight, former Deputy Assistant to President Biden, Jamal Simmons, and CNN political commentator S.E. Cupp. I mean, S.E., it's pretty remarkable to hear Sam talk about what Peter Navarro is going to be living through, that he's going to be waking up in this prison where he can hear the lions from the Miami Zoo roar in the mornings.
I mean, I think it also, I don't want to make light of this. It doesn't sound that bad compared to, I think, a lot of the conditions that a lot of other not special, not wealthy, not white-collar criminals have to endure in prison. You know, no offense, but like it sounds pretty great to have all that freedom and, you know, have a job and take some classes. So it's real hard for me to sit here and say, wow, he's going to have a really tough time in there. I don't think it's going to be that tough. And for a guy who willingly put himself here,
well, and I think
this is the consequence.
The other thing to think about is he's also in his 70s. That is obviously a factor here. You heard Sam mention that. But it is important to remember why he's here. Yeah. Because he was someone who openly talked about a plan to delay the certification of the votes on Capitol Hill. I mean, it's written in his memoir.
And then, and then refused to go and basically incriminate Trump. Because what you have to do is you have to lie for Trump to support Trump. That's true of people who work for him. Ask Michael Cohen, who lied for Trump and then went to jail for it. It's true of Republicans in Congress. Ask Ken Buck, who said, I'm retiring because I no longer want to have to lie for Donald Trump. It's true of his preferred media outlets. They have to lie about the facts. And worse, it's true of his voters, who will spread his lies because they're loyal to him. Hundreds of them now are in jail because of a lie he told on January 6th.
What did you make of the remarks that he gave before going in, where he was basically blaming everyone, the judges here, Democrats, President Biden even, for what is very clearly the result of his own action by defying a congressional subpoena?
It was bananas. I mean, really. I mean, only the best people, right? Listen, I have been through a security clearance check, getting a job at the White House. I have had to talk to White House lawyers about various actions before we took them and make sure things get cleared. And, you know, you get an exit interview when you leave, when you sit down with people and they talk you through like what your responsibilities are and if you've had any access to information and what you can divulge and how much. You go through a lot of legal exercise. This man did not have to be in this position, right? He did not have to be here. He's here because he chose to take a series of actions, including trying to stop a federal election. But even after all of that, the only reason he's in jail is because he did not appear in front of Congress when they called him. All he had to do was show up and say, I don't want to answer that question, take the fifth or whatever. He didn't do it. This is another example of the Trump people believe they don't have to play by the rules as everyone else because Donald Trump doesn't play by the rules. And that has filtered all the way through his crowd.
Well, and he claimed he had executive privilege, but Trump's legal team never came out to say, oh, that's true. Here's all this evidence to back that up.
Well, you know, Trump only cares about defending Trump. I mean, Trump will throw anyone, anybody, any warm body in front of a bus to avoid his own, you know, being held accountable. So that's not surprising either.
SC Cup, Jamal Simmons. Great to have you both on to talk about that. Up next, new reporting tonight on the panic in Trump world over that $500 million bond coming due in just a matter of days. Also tonight, we're digging into a major new ruling from the Supreme Court on immigration. Some justices arguing it will only invite chaos and crisis. New reporting tonight on what's going on inside of Donald Trump's world as a deadline to put up $500 million is fast approaching. Panic mode, I'm told, is setting in. Trump now has less than a week to secure that bond, and he had been counting on the insurance company that helped put up the $91 million to cover the E. Jean Carroll judgment, that bond, to come in. But the insurance giant there informed his attorneys in the last several days that that option was not going to be on the table. His team has been weighing other options here, like seeking out wealthy supporters or weighing which of his assets could be sold and fast. I'm told that Trump himself has become increasingly concerned about the optics that March 25th deadline could bring, given he is someone who has long tied his identity to his wealth, and he could find himself confronting a real financial crisis in just a matter of days. Trump posted 8 times within 2 hours this morning on Truth Social, arguing that he shouldn't have to put up that money and saying, quote, that he would be forced to mortgage or sell great assets, perhaps at fire sale prices, and if and when I win the appeal, they would be gone. Trump has continued to privately lash out at the Attorney General here in New York, Letitia James, who brought this case, and the judge, Arthur Engoron. Here tonight is CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. And Ellie, I should note that Trump's team, when we asked about, the concern that he has over making this $500 million bond, called it pure BS and noted that he has filed this motion to unstay what they're calling an unjust and unconstitutional judgment. What they're asking for is either don't make us pay this while we're appealing, or let this bond be a lot smaller than this, nearly $500 million. What do you make of this new reporting, though?
So they should be panicked. I mean, this is real. Like, it may not have set in yet for Donald Trump, but this deadline of Monday is real. This judgment is $400+ million. And what's going to happen on Monday if Trump cannot post a bond is Letitia James has made very clear she will start the process of seizing his assets, of freezing, putting liens on his bank accounts, his real estate holdings. And that's going to be devastating for him. And there's no sort of shortcut here. That's what's going to happen if he doesn't come up with a bond.
So our reporting and what I was hearing from people is that he was basically counting on Chubb, which put up the bond for the E. Jean Carroll case, to help here. But the problem is that he doesn't have as much to leverage when it comes to a second bond that is, one, much bigger, and two, obviously the second one that he's now doing in just a matter of weeks. Yeah. Realistically, what options does his legal team have here?
Yeah, $90 million is 1/5 of $400 million or so, so he's in a tough spot. There are two things that can bail Trump out of this. One is, remember, he has moved to the Court of Appeals in New York, the appellate division, asking them to reduce the amount of the bond. That happens sometimes. It's hard to say how often because there's no sort of overarching data on it. But there are examples of the appeals court coming in and reducing a bond by 80, 90%. So perhaps he'll get bailed out by the court. And the other option is he comes up with the money, whether he has some sort of angel investor or some sort of generous donor, or perhaps some company like Chubb that's willing to take a risk. But the status quo now is he has scoured the earth and been unable to come up with that.
How likely is he to get this appeals court to come to his saving here? It's
hard to say because the judgment amount here is mammoth. And there are examples. There's an example where one court of appeals took a $38 million judgment and knocked it down to $10,000. That's a huge reduction. So he's got a shot. I mean, I think if he's just waiting and hoping on that, he could be setting himself up for real disappointment. I think the better course of action is to get the money together if I was advising him. So I would say he's got a shot, but I wouldn't bank on it.
I mean, when it comes to this, though, if he's not banking on that, he's got days left here.
Yeah, it's, what is it, Tuesday?
Yeah,
he's got 6 days. I mean, Letitia James is going to be ready to roll out and start seizing these properties. That's real. And she's made clear she is giving him no leeway whatsoever.
Yeah, and of course, we know the E. Jean Carroll case, that was kind of the 11th hour when he came in with that agreement there from the insurance giant. We'll see if it happens there. But the other thing that's going on is, I mean, he's facing other legal expenses still as well. He's got these criminal cases that are approaching. His legal team today just filed their other brief in the immunity argument to the Supreme Court. And in it, they're basically kind of suggesting this off-ramp of, if the court doesn't agree, sending it back down to a lower court, which would essentially help with their strategy of delaying all of this.
That would be Donald Trump's team's dream come true, to get it sent back down. I want to make clear, I just read through this brief recently. It just came in a couple hours ago, very recently.
As in tonight.
Yes, as in a few hours ago. The term absolute immunity gets a bad rap. It's a little misleading. Donald Trump is not arguing, I'm automatically covered by everything that happened from the moment I took the oath till the moment I left. What he's arguing is that I'm covered for my official acts within the scope of the presidency. And that's what could lead to the outcome that you discussed just now. If the Supreme Court says, okay, you can be covered for something within the presidency, now the district court, the trial court, you have to do fact-finding as to whether the charges here relate to something inside the presidency or outside the presidency. That would be a win for Donald Trump.
So I read through this also, and the brief includes statements. It's not surprising what their argument is, because we've been hearing this official acts argument, but they also include statements like this, saying that he communicated with the vice president's official staff, members of Congress, to urge them to exercise their official duties in the election certification process in accordance with the position based on voluminous information available to President Trump in his official capacity, that the election was tainted by extensive fraud and irregularities.
Yeah.
It's not true.
That's some spin, right? I mean,
how does the Supreme Court read something like that?
That's the problem. The argument that if he was within his scope, he's covered, that's potentially legitimate. But the twisting of logic and reality that Trump has to do to get there, to get what he did within the scope of the presidency, is facially ridiculous, right? He says, well, I was just calling the vice president and asking him to do his job. I was just calling the Georgia Secretary of State and asking him to do his job. No, he wasn't. I mean, we've seen the calls. We've heard the testimony. He's asking them to violate their oaths of office. That's where I think he's going to run into trouble. And there's one more thing that I noted about the brief. Donald Trump's lawyers make the mistake of saddling a decent argument about whether he's in the scope or not with a ridiculous argument, which is this impeachment argument, that he can only be indicted if he's been impeached and then convicted by the Senate. I don't know why they include that. They don't need that. And to me, that sinks the argument. So if I'm advising Trump's legal team, which I'm not, but if I'm advising any normal person, I would say, leave out the lousy argument, just bank on the good one here.
And that is included in here, though. We'll see how the Supreme Court responds to it.
It's going to be very interesting.
Thanks for responding to that new reporting and that brief. The Supreme Court has been making a lot of decisions for Americans, including on immigration today. That's a big one. For now, they are letting a Texas law stand, saying that state police can arrest migrants suspected of crossing the border illegally. This is raising huge concerns to know about potential racial profiling. We'll speak to the head of the Border Patrol Union right after this. The state of Texas, for now, an emphasis on for now, can make its own rules to deal with illegal immigration. That is the U.S. Supreme Court's decision as they just cleared the way for that controversial new law that would let any Texas law enforcement officer, including local police, to arrest anyone that they suspect of entering the country illegally. The Department of Homeland Security has just weighed in tonight, saying that this decision, quote, makes it harder for the DHS workforce to do its job. This is not the final decision, I should note. The law could still be struck down as it is making its way through the courts. But tonight in the state of Texas, there is a situation where two of the court's more liberal justices called an invitation for further chaos and crisis. The governor there, of course, praised this decision by the Supreme Court. Here to weigh in on all of this tonight is Brandon Judd, the president of the National Border Patrol Council, who supports the law that is known commonly as SB4. And it's great to have you back on the show, Brandon. But we're hearing from the Mexican government tonight, who said it will not accept anyone who is sent back by the state of Texas. So how is this going to work?
First off, I don't think that that's going to be an issue. When you look at people crossing the border illegally, what they're going to try to avoid is they're going to try to avoid a conviction, a criminal conviction on their record. Because the vast majority of these people that come to the United States illegally, they are going to hope that sometime down the line, they are going to be able to apply for either citizenship or permanent resident status in the United States. And when you have a criminal conviction on your record, that becomes nearly impossible. So they're going to avoid that like the plague. So what I foresee happening is that once the word gets out that Texas is going to arrest you for criminal trespass, this is not an immigration law. This is trespassing in the state of Texas. When you're going to be arrested for that, I suspect that the traffic is going to move to New Mexico, Arizona, and California because people are going to avoid that criminal conviction on their record. This is going to be a huge win for the state of Texas, not necessarily for border security across the board, but for Texas, it's going to be a huge win.
Well, we know, obviously Tucson has already been dealing with the height of this crisis, but if it's just temporary, which was, something that was stressed by the court today as it's still making its way through other legal challenges, is it really going to be that much of a deterrent, do you think?
It is in the immediacy. So what happens, what we see with illegal immigration all the time is it takes a little bit of time for the word to spread what is taking place. When you hold people in custody, that people stop coming. When you actually apply a consequence, people stop coming. But it takes a little bit of time for that word to spread. But it doesn't take a whole lot of days. So I do expect to see in a drop in illegal immigration in the state of Texas very quickly. And again, it's just going to move. Now, if we saw other governors do the exact same thing, then we would see a drop in illegal immigration across the entire southwest border. But unfortunately for us, that's not going to happen.
But, okay, so you're saying that you think that this will be helpful in Texas. I hear your concerns about it spreading to other states that do not have a similar law. But I think the question is how they enforce this, because we are hearing from a lot of law enforcement in the state of Texas tonight who say they don't have the manpower to carry something like this out. They don't have the bed spaces in jails for these kinds of arrests that they now have the authority to make. So how difficult is this for local law enforcement to actually even do?
So I'm in contact with local law enforcement in Texas quite often. I'm also in contact with the governor's office, and they're not concerned about this because they know that it's going to be a short-term rush. They know that in the immediacy, you're going to have to arrest an awful lot of people, but that's going to alleviate as time goes by, as the word gets out, and you're going to have less people crossing. So you're not going to be putting a lot of resources towards this as time goes on. Again, you pay up front for the long-term benefit, and that's what Texas is doing here. I also have to look at what DHS just put out, and they said that it's going to cause chaos, and I disagree with that 100%. They said the exact same thing when Texas came in and seized Shelby Park, and we didn't see any chaos. In fact, what we saw is Border Patrol agents were able to be freed up to go to more troubled spots to go after the criminal activity. There was zero chaos. There's not going to be any chaos in this either.
I mean, that's a bold proclamation. And you said that you've heard from law enforcement that you think that this won't be an issue. I will say the Maverick County Sheriff said that they're not going to accept suspected migrants being arrested because he said he just doesn't have the room for that. But the other concern here that we've heard from people tonight, and I wonder what your thoughts on this are, is about racial profiling. The Dallas police chief, mentioned this in their statement tonight, saying that there are real concerns that this could contribute to that, even far away from the southern border. Are you worried that this is something that could be a likelihood for people in the state of Texas who now feel like they have to carry around different kinds of identification because of this law?
So what I have to look at is I have to look at the history. Look at Texas DPS's history, and they do not have a history of racial profiling. They have a history of very good training. They have a history of law enforcement. No, okay, but there's several other laws that lots of people have said could cause racial profiling. Okay, we have to wait and see, but we do know that Texas DPS does not have a history of racial profiling. We know that Border Patrol agents do not have a history of racial profiling. There's a lot of law enforcement organizations out there that do not have that history. And when you put in place proper training, we see that law enforcement officers act within the scope of law. That's what they want to do. The vast majority of law enforcement officers put on a uniform so that they can go out and protect the American people and also properly enforce the law. The bad apples, you need to weed them out. But there are very few bad apples, and that has been proven time and time again. And go back to the resource issue of the sheriff. The sheriff doesn't have to enforce this law. As sheriff of a county, they have prosecutorial discretion. They don't have to do it. What we do know is going to happen is that state police officers, state DPS, they will enforce the law, and they do have the resources to do it, and they do not have a history of racial profiling.
Okay, well, I mean, those are two major bets. We'll see what it looks like now that it is in place, at least for now. Brandon, Judd, thank you for coming on and sharing your insight.
Thank you, Caitlin. Appreciate it.
Also tonight, former President Donald Trump once said that his son-in-law would create peace in the Middle East. But tonight, Jared Kushner is suggesting Palestinians could be moved out of areas. Maybe they could be built up, the former areas where they used to live, because they could have valuable property potential. We'll play the remarks and let you hear it for yourself right after this. Part of his profile inside the White House was to create peace in the Middle East. Jared Kushner also acted as a foreign policy advisor to his father-in-law, Donald Trump. And tonight, he is getting a lot of attention for what he said during a talk at Harvard about what's happening and what could happen inside of Gaza.
Both sides are spending a fortune on military. I think neither side really wants to have, a terrorist organization enclaved right between them. I mean, Gaza's waterfront property. It could be very valuable to, if people would focus on kind of building up, livelihoods. You think about all the money that's gone into this tunnel network and into all the munitions. If that would have gone into education or innovation, what could have been done? And so I think that it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there, but I think from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up.
Here to weigh in, Josh Rogan, columnist for the Washington Post. Josh, I just have to get your initial reaction to those remarks by Jared Kushner.
Right. Well, my initial reaction is sort of shock. I know we shouldn't be shocked at this point by the sheer sort of callousness and insensitivity of calling it a little unfortunate when 30,000 people have been killed. There's a terrorist attack that killed hundreds of Israelis. The entire region's inflamed. And Jared Kushner's reaction is, oh, well, it's a real shame we couldn't put some condos here. That's my initial reaction. But if you put that aside, I think what the takeaway here is that, what we see is a preview into what a Trump administration Israel policy would really look like. And Jared Kushner said the quiet part out loud, that he thinks we should move the people out and clean it up. Okay? And if that's not exactly a call for forced displacement of 2 million Palestinians and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, but it's pretty close. It's kind of getting there. And that is a really troubling prospect for an American administration, but it also could be sort of a dog whistle to some parts of the Israeli establishment that actually favor that plan.
Yeah, that is the part that stood out to me as well, where he talked about moving the people out, as were his exact words there. And I think what's the important context here is Donald Trump is someone who often speaks his mind. One thing we have not heard a lot from him about in recent months since October 7th is how he'd be handling what is happening inside Gaza right now if he were in the Oval Office. And I wonder what those comments by Jared Kushner, someone who did play a key role inside the White House, what that says to you about what it could look like if Trump was in office amid something like this.
Right. Now, Jared Kushner has said that he doesn't plan to join a second Trump administration, if that's a thing. Nevertheless, it's pretty clear that Donald Trump listens to him on these issues. And, I'm old enough to remember the last administration when he did lead these issues. And his plan then was pretty much the same, where, well, we'll make a deal, we'll do some real estate deals, and the Palestinians will be happy, and we'll normalize relations, everything will be hunky-dory. But it didn't work out because the Palestinians are not just interested in real estate, they're interested in dignity and sovereignty and autonomy and all of the things that most humans want out of these types of situations. So I think what it says is that the Trump administration, if it follows this pattern, would be one that aligns with the very far-right parts of the Netanyahu coalition, who are now not so quietly calling for exactly what Jared just called for, which is the resettlement of Gaza. What Jared said, if you listen to more of that speech, which I unfortunately had to do to prepare for this interview, is that, while wars happen and borders change and Gaza is not a real thing and the Arabs will have to take the Palestinians and tough luck to the Palestinians. That was his, I'm boiling it down to be sure, but that was the gist of it. And you could imagine the Trump administration taking exactly that tack. And, there are a lot of criticisms to be had of the Biden administration's approach to Israel, but I think most, fair-minded people in America would say that aligning the U.S. policy with the farthest rightist parts of the Netanyahu coalition would be a disaster.
It also just, even pulling it back some from the Middle East reminded me of when, Trump was talking to Kim Jong-un about the idea of waterfront property in North Korea and what that could look like. He actually mentioned it at a summit in 2018 after he had met with the dictator. Just a reminder of what Trump said there.
They have great beaches. You see that whenever they're exploding their cannons into the ocean, right? So I said, boy, look at that. Wouldn't that make a great condo behind? And I explained, I said, instead of doing that, you could have the best hotels in the world right there. Think of it from a real estate perspective. You have South Korea, you have China, and they own the land in the middle. How bad is that?
It's like this idea of foreign policy through the lens of a real estate deal.
Right. The Trump brand is that, the D.C. foreign policy establishment doesn't know what it's talking about and everything can be done as a real estate deal. Well, it didn't work in Hanoi with Trump and Kim Jong-un, and it's not going to work with the Palestinians. In the end, not everything can be bought off and not everything is for sale. And I think that's what Trump realized, and that's what Jared would realize if he were ever given the power to be in charge of this issue again.
Josh Rogan, thank you.
Anytime.
Up next, a projection that CNN can now make in the high-stakes Senate race this primary night in America, right after a quick break. It is primary night in America, and we now have a CNN projection. CNN can now project that Bernie Moreno, the Trump-endorsed businessman, will win the Ohio Republican Senate primary. With this win, he has now defeated Ohio's Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, and State Senator Matt Dolan. Here tonight, covering all of this, is Jeff Zeleny, CNN's chief national affairs correspondent, who's live in Columbus tonight. Jeff, obviously, this was looked at as a test of Trump's political power here and what that could mean going forward as we look to a lot of races in November. What does this Bernie Moreno win signify?
Caitlin, it certainly was viewed as one of the last gasps of the Never Trump movement, if you will, trying to push back against the MAGA movement. You had the establishment wing of the Republican Party here in Ohio, Governor Mike DeWine, former Senator Rob Portman, backing Matt Dolan, a state senator whose family owns the Cleveland Guardians, and they were really pushing for his candidacy. But it was the Trump-backed Bernie Moreno who won tonight. And the sense of this, I mean, there's no doubt that Trump controls the Republican Party, but there still is a sense of some outliers out there. And from a policy matter, Governor DeWine was talking specifically, imploring Republicans to consider foreign policy, consider funding for Ukraine. Those arguments simply did not win the day. So just a short time ago in Cleveland, Bernie Moreno, who is a former car dealer, a Colombian immigrant, he had this to say about his win and who he thanked.
I also want to thank President Trump. I just got off the phone with President Trump. And, you know, the reality is we have an opportunity now. We have an opportunity now to retire the old commie and send them to retirement home and then save this country.
So presumably Bernie Moreno was talking about Senator Brown there, who, of course, is seeking his fourth term here in Ohio. Now, Senator Brown has always run better than Democrats have. His brand has been stronger than Democrats. But, Caitlin, that will be tested anew over the next 8 months leading into November. There is no doubt Ohio has increasingly become a red state. The last time he was on the ballot, Senator Brown, it was more of a blue wave in 2018. So this will be one of the marquee Senate races. The reason is because only 2 seats could tip control of the Senate come November.
Yeah, Jeff, if people are at home wondering, why do I care who won the Republican primary in Ohio in the Senate race? I mean, it really does matter and could all come down to which party does control the U.S. Senate come November, whether it's Biden in the White House or Donald Trump.
Without question, and there are only 2 Democratic U.S. senators, Sherrod Brown here in Ohio and John Tester in Montana, who are up for re-election in red states, in Trump-won states. So that is why control of the Senate is so important, of course, to everything, regardless of who wins the White House. It could be split. I mean, if President Biden wins re-election, he could have a Republican Senate. If Donald Trump wins, he could have a Democratic-controlled Senate. So that indeed is why it matters. And Ohio has long been a battleground state for the White House. That has sort of changed over recent years, but it is absolutely ground zero for the Senate control. And, Caitlin, an interesting point is, and we will see if this was a wise decision by November, but Democrats, Chuck Schumer's linked super PAC, invested some $3 million to try and boost Bernie Moreno in the final days of the race. They think he is the weaker candidate to take on Sherrod Brown. We will see about that. We've seen Democrats sort of meddling in these Republican primaries before. They did it tonight here in Ohio. But now the race is on, no doubt the toughest race of Sherrod Brown's long career.
That's really interesting. So Democrats were spending money, you're saying, in the days before this race to boost this candidate out of all 3 of the Republicans who are running, because basically, I mean, that does signify, even if they don't outright say it, that they think he'd be easier to win come November, to beat come November.
Without a doubt. I mean, and, Senator Schumer is as astute as a politician as there is, and he did not, control this, but his closely linked super PAC, people from his orbit who run the spending, decided to boost Moreno through ads, saying that he was the most conservative in the race. They tied him to Trump. So it really elevated his stature in the final days here. And again, we've seen some of this meddling by both sides in primaries, but it's an open question in a race now where Donald Trump will be on the ballot here in November. He was projected the winner tonight in Ohio as well, as will Sherrod Brown. And the only way for Sherrod Brown to win is by winning some Trump voters. And I talked to Senator Brown yesterday. He said he acknowledges, he knows this is the toughest race he's ever had, but he also says that he runs better than his party, better than presidents in his party. He certainly will have to be reelected.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting race in an increasingly red Ohio. Jeff Zeleny on the ground in Columbus, thank you for that. And speaking of this 2024 stage, of course, we know we've got a presidential election rematch set between Biden and Trump right now, as they are both presumptive nominees. But there is still one question tonight about who else could be on the ticket, maybe not in all states, but in certain states. That group, No Labels, has been running out of options lately for their long shot third-party bid. So far, they have not found anyone willing to run on the ticket, at least not publicly, that we have learned about, as we've been reporting on this behind the scenes. My next guest just withdrew his name from consideration. That is former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, who obviously was previously a political commentator here at CNN. And Jeff, it's great to have you on. You know, you talked about why you withdrew, your family, but on the political aspect of this, you know, what swayed you against getting on the no labels ticket?
Well, first and foremost, our family passes along our heartfelt gratitude for just a very professional process by No Labels donors, advisors, folks in the organization. It was a first-class operation. For me, just the political math of being somebody that's just coming onto the scene, not having a ton of name ID and a short runway to get to November just didn't make the math possible for me. But I certainly hope they're able to put a strong candidate forward. So I've got somebody to vote for. I'm like tens of millions of other Americans.
Yeah. Do you think that they'll be able to, though? Because it seems like every candidate that they've approached that we know about has said no thanks, but no thanks.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, in the few weeks I was around the hoop with these guys, I just was continued to be refreshed by the conversations, meeting after meeting after meeting, talking about real solutions instead of just talking about problems, whether it be donors, supporters, advisors. Everybody was circling around. That's how America is supposed to be solving these problems. And I certainly hope they're able to put out a strong ticket.
Unfortunately, we're running up against the end of the hour. Thank you for coming on to give us that insight. Thank you all so much for joining us. CNN Newsnight with Abby Phillip starts now.
Who's in charge of America's border? That's tonight on Newsnight. And good evening, I'm Abby Phillip in Washington. Tonight, confusion and chaos reign supreme over the border. Texas is pitted against the feds. Caught in the middle, the migrants, who can now be deported en masse and at will on a hunch. This is all happening after the Supreme Court waded directly into the heart of the immigration issue today. They scrambled how things typically work, that immigration policy for the United States is the domain of the federal government. And there are profound constitutional questions that this raises. But in the meantime, the practical impact is becoming more clear. Scores of people could be rounded up hundreds of miles from the southern border even, based on suspicion, and suspicion alone. Local officials, sheriffs, could all be deputized to essentially enforce U.S. border policy. The court's conservative majority brushed aside a last-ditch Biden administration push to stop this new Texas law, SB 4, and it now goes into effect, at least temporarily, while litigation winds its way through the lower courts. Ultimately, this could ricochet across conservative border states. If allowed to stand, it could usher in dramatic, even draconian policies that leave immigration enforcement at the hands of legislators from Austin to Phoenix. Joining me now, the highest-ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries. Congressman, thank you for staying up for us tonight. First of all, the Supreme Court delivering this win for Texas and a loss for the Biden administration. What do you think the impact of all of this is going to be?
Well, good evening. Great to be with you. It's a deeply troubling decision from the extreme conservatives on the Supreme Court. It's clear that we have a broken immigration system. We've acknowledged that, and that we need to address the challenges at the border. We believe that we should address those challenges in a clear-eyed, comprehensive way, in a manner consistent with our values as a nation of immigrants and a nation anchored in the rule of law. We need a strong, secure, and humane border. What we're seeing from many of our Republican colleagues is that they don't want to actually address the issue. They just want to engage in political stunts or try not to solve the issue so they can weaponize the border and immigration issue in November. I think the American people are going to reject that. But what the Supreme Court has done in this particular instance is quite unfortunate.
As you know, Congress has tried to a degree and failed to get immigration done, even in this Congress. Do you think that the chances of something being revived this year are over?
Well, as House Democrats, we've made clear that we are ready, willing, and able to find bipartisan common ground with our Republican colleagues on any issue, including fixing our broken immigration system and addressing the challenges at the border. President Biden has made clear that he wants to work together to try to find bipartisan solutions to fix the challenges that we have at the border. The big challenge, of course, is that many Republicans don't want to address the issue. They want to weaponize the issue politically. That's the height of irresponsibility. But hope springs eternal, and let's see what happens over the next few months.
So not ruling it out there, notably. I want to turn to the issue of funding the government. Congressional negotiators have finally gotten to a deal to fund the government through the fall. It seems likely the Democrats will have to help the Republican majority in the House get this across the finish line. Are you advising your members to support this compromise?
Well, tomorrow morning we'll meet as a Democratic caucus. We'll hear presentations from the appropriators about the agreement in principle that has been reached. So I'm not going to get out ahead of that presentation and the conversation that we'll have as Democrats. I do think it's fair to say that the agreement that has been reached is consistent with our values as Democrats, and that the spending agreement will continue to provide for the health, the safety, the education, and the economic well-being of the American people in a manner that is designed to focus on middle-class families, low-income families, and working families, as opposed to the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected.
So as we're speaking here tonight, President Biden is out west. He's doing a campaign swing, largely speaking to a lot of Latino voters who are going to be key to this next election. I know, I'll just preface this by saying you're probably going to say that polling is all over the place in this campaign. We know it's early. But I want to show you this New York Times Siena College poll that found that both Black and Hispanic voters say that Donald Trump's policies have helped them more than Joe Biden's policies by pretty wide margins, especially when you look at Hispanic voters. Is that alarming to you, that nothing that the Biden campaign has said or done to this point has brought that at least closer than it is right now in this polling?
The Biden administration has an incredible track record of support in making sure that it is working at all times to build an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, as opposed to the top down, and to make sure that every single community throughout the United States of America, including the Hispanic community, the African American community, the Asian American community, rural communities, the heartland of America, have an opportunity to robustly pursue the American dream. I think what will be important over the next few months is that we are aggressively communicating both the accomplishments that have taken place, whether that is rescuing the economy from the once-in-a-century pandemic, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is creating millions of good-paying jobs in every community, fixing our crumbling bridges, roads, and tunnels, and ensuring there's clean water in every single community, bringing domestic manufacturing jobs back home to the United States of America, and, of course, lowering the high price of life-saving prescription drugs, including taking the price of insulin for millions of Americans down to $35 a month. It's going to be incredibly important that we talk about those accomplishments, but not in a manner that is designed to say to the American people, reward us for what we have done, but trust us. We're going to continue to build upon this progress led by President Biden and deliver real results to make life better for every single community and for everyday Americans.
I want to play for you on a different topic, something that Donald Trump said about Jewish people and your party when it comes to the issue of Israel. Listen.
Why do the Democrats hate Bibi Netanyahu?
I actually think they hate Israel.
Yes.
I don't think they hate him. I think they hate Israel. And the Democrat Party hates Israel. Any Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion. They hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves because Israel will be destroyed.
What's your reaction to that?
Very irresponsible during a time of rising anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hatred that is horrific in terms of the levels that we have seen over the last few months. We need so-called leaders like the former president to try to bring people together, not be divisive and utilize dangerous rhetoric. But of course, that's what the former President Donald Trump specializes in. We've seen it for years, and unfortunately, there's no reason to believe that he will ever change. That's why I'm looking forward to continued leadership from President Joe Biden, who wants to bring the American people together and move us forward, as opposed to dangerously trying to turn back the clock.
He was there responding to the comments that were made by your colleague in the Senate, Leader Chuck Schumer, who called for new elections in Israel after the war in Gaza is over. Schumer says he doesn't believe that Netanyahu can continue to serve as prime minister. Do you agree with him on that Netanyahu is not the best person to lead Israel into a future, to lead the region into a peaceful future?
As I've said, I've got every confidence that at the appropriate time, the Israeli people will make the right decision in terms of what's in the best interests of the future of Israel. Right now, we have a situation where Hamas, of course, has to be decisively defeated. We need to get the hostages out and surge humanitarian assistance in to help out innocent Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way through no fault of their own.
Was Schumer right to address this issue at all? Netanyahu was pretty upset that he said that a Democratic official in the United States was wading into Israel's domestic policies.
Leader Schumer, throughout his career, has been an incredibly strong supporter of the special relationship between the United States and Israel, and I believe he will continue to be moving forward. And it is unfortunate that some of my extreme MAGA Republican colleagues, once again, are trying to politicize the issue of the relationship between the United States and Israel, as opposed to leaning in at a time when Israel is in the middle of a war against Hamas.
All right, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, a lot going on the Hill tonight, hence why you are still over there late this Tuesday night. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And as Republican voters hit the polls tonight, some lawmakers are actively campaigning against their own peers. And Speaker Johnson is telling them, knock it off. One of them will join me live. Republican Matt Gaetz is here in studio. Plus, time is running out for Donald Trump to meet his bond, and he's now suggesting that he needs to hold a fire sale of his properties. This is Newsnight. New tonight, primary results are coming in, and even though we know the presidential matchup is set, some big headlines are coming in from down-ballot races that will help decide control of Congress. CNN senior data reporter Harry Enton joins me from the Magic Wall to break it all down. Harry, the Trump-backed candidate in Ohio won that Republican Senate primary. He'll face the incumbent, Sherrod Brown, a Democrat. What's that going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, look, Abby, there was this whole belief maybe this was the Senate primary to watch tonight. Maybe it'd be a close race. It wasn't close. Bernie Moreno, of course, was backed by Donald Trump, has now crossed the 50% threshold. He has defeated Matt Dolan, who is the more moderate candidate, backed, of course, by the Republican governor there, Mike DeWine. You can look on your Senate map here. It's pretty much all Moreno-Cranberry. Only one little county over here, Hardin County, and there's only 27% of the vote in there. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if that, in fact, turns over to Cranberry and Moreno actually ends up winning it. Of course, it shouldn't be a big surprise that you would see a Republican. Let's see if we can get there. There we go. Oh, hold on. There we go. A Trump-backed candidate winning in a primary. Why is that? Look, historically speaking, Trump primary endorsement win percentage. In 2020 in House, Gov, and Senate races, 96%. In 2022, 89%. So this is well in line with what we generally see, that is Trump-backed candidates winning in primaries. Of course, the real question as we head towards the general election is whether or not Bernie Moreno can win there. And this, I think, is the big question, because if you go back to 2022, Trump-backed Senate candidates lost key races in Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. So even though Moreno won tonight, there's still a big question going in the general election against Sherrod Brown, who I think would rather Moreno be the candidate than Matt Dolan.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the most watched Senate races in this upcoming cycle. Harry Enton, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And joining me now is Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, in some of these races, including tonight in the state of Florida, you've got candidates voting, but you have actually backed some candidates who are running against your own colleagues. One example, Illinois, you endorsed the Republican candidate Darren Bailey over the sitting Republican there, Mike Bost. Bost was endorsed by Trump. Not good enough for you?
Well, I think I made my endorsement before the president did in that race, and no two people see every question the same way. But I think one thing we're learning from the results tonight is that there is no force more powerful in Republican politics than the endorsement of President Trump. Bernie Moreno outperforming all of the polling and other Trump-endorsed candidates doing very well across the board. I think it portends to a real unification of the Republican Party heading into the general election.
Why are you fighting against your own colleagues? Speaker Johnson has argued that you shouldn't, and that not just you specifically, but you and other colleagues.
Yeah, I've had many conversations with Speaker Johnson, and he says, Matt, we can't run the plays you want to run because we don't have the players that will back them. And so I'm trying to improve the players. And there are a few circumstances around the country. I think Brandon Herrera would be an improvement over Tony Gonzalez, where if you have a challenger prevail over the incumbent, it not only changes the dynamics in that seat, it changes the whole ecosystem in the Republican conference, where maybe people are willing to be more bold, more daring, and embrace a lot of the process reforms that I wanted, like single subject spending bills and downward pressure on overall federal spending.
It does seem that Mike Johnson disagrees with the candidates here. I mean, he seems to think that it's not the best thing to run against people who are already in the Congress. You told my colleague Manu Raju, at the end of the day, we're not judged by how many Republicans we have in Congress. We're judged on whether or not we save the country. I mean, don't you need a majority in Congress in order to save the country, if that's what you're after?
Yeah, a majority is necessary but not sufficient, right? Because if what we have is a majority of people who, by the dozens, will vote with Democrats for higher spending, for these trillion-dollar spending bills with disparate subjects connected to one another, then it becomes hard to distinguish a Republican majority from a Democrat majority.
But if you have a minority, you don't even get to set the agenda. You're just responding to
it sort of feels a lot like how things are right now, because if I were setting the agenda, we would be taking these federal agencies one at a time. We wouldn't be mashing them together in a minibus. So again, I want us to have a majority. I'm not saying that that's not a laudable goal, but it has to be a majority of people willing to fight. And look, I admire what the squad did in the Democratic conference. At first, there was like 4 of them. Now I look over there and everybody wants to be like the squad. So there's a way a small group of people connected with the base voters in a political party can influence the rest of the legislative body and conference.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because, I mean, when Nancy Pelosi had a very narrow majority, those very members of the squad, they voted with their party. They didn't throw a big fight every time that there was a spending bill. They were pretty united. Republicans,
well, they got their way, Abby.
Well, Republicans
look at what they
seem to
got.
not be able to do that.
Yeah, but look at what the squad got. They got basically the progressive plan to become the Biden plan on the American Rescue Plan and a lot of the post-COVID era funding bills. And so they were able to draw their conference closer to their viewpoint. That's what I'm trying to do. I want the Republican conference to be more America first in its worldview and more focused on downward pressure on spending here at home.
So right now, Speaker Johnson has come up with a deal with the White House and with the Senate to fund the government. And this bill is, to put it nicely, being panned by some of your colleagues. Just listen to what some of them had to say.
This minibus is worse than the other. Look, this country's in trouble. I don't know when we're going to start facing it.
Same song, second verse.
I've been very clear. I think that the government should actually secure its borders before we start talking about government funding. That's been my position.
I know viewers have been paying attention because we've been covering it. We've had you on the show multiple times. It sounds like deja vu. I mean, this is your hand-picked speaker. Are you resigned now that this is just the way it's going to work, whether or not the speaker is Kevin McCarthy or Mike Johnson?
I'm always more hopeful for Mike Johnson, but let's remember Kevin McCarthy had a 4-seat majority. Mike Johnson's down to a 1-seat majority on some days, and so it's a different standard that I think you have to judge them by. But the answer to this last question is really your first question. When you ask me about challenging incumbents around the country, my colleagues who just spoke there are right in their criticism of this bill, and they're right that the current Republican majority is all too willing to just be the uniparty with the Democrats and fund the government in the absence of our requirements to secure the border and to lead to some semblance of balance in the federal budget. So, yeah, just changing the speaker isn't going to do it. Necessary but not sufficient. In order to achieve my goals, I'm going to have a different group of people in the Congress. That's why I'm trying to get different and better people.
Are you disappointed in the speaker?
I would have hoped for more, and frankly, I think he would have as well. When I think about how Mike Johnson campaigned for the job of Speaker, he sounded a lot more like I do, right? But upon getting the job, I think he's been drawn into some of the ways of Washington that lead us on a suboptimal path. I like Mike Johnson. He's a friend. We communicate on an almost daily basis, and I hope to give Mike Johnson a better team so that when he is the Speaker in the 119th Congress, we're able to fulfill his conservative policy ambitions.
I want to ask you about Donald Trump because this week he told the court that he could not get any underwriters to help him pay his more than $400 million bond. If no underwriters are willing to back him on this, why should voters?
Well, because underwriters have to make a financial decision about the New York court system. That's not a bet that voters have to make, right? Voters are making a bet based on their own economic condition, whether or not we live in a safer world. And I think we're going to be pitching peace and prosperity. Biden's going to be pitching, a lot of danger and unsafety.
The fact that he's not able to get anyone to help him out here seems to suggest that they don't trust him to be good for this money.
Well, no, I think it means that they're not certain in a successful appeal in the New York legal system. I go ask people for a vote all the time, and I probably wouldn't be bondable at $500 million either, right? And so I think in this case, you've got a weaponized system that, even Kevin O'Leary is out there saying that with Tish James pursuing this civil matter in the absence of a real complainant or a real business loss, it's making things worse for New York, and it's a real perversion of the law.
A lot of people disagree with Kevin O'Leary on that one, but I want to ask you this. A conservative broadcaster, Mark Levin, he wrote this: why are there no Republican multi-billionaires offering to lend President Trump the funds to file his appeal in this outrageous case in New York State, and none of them liquid enough to help or join with the others to help? It's an outrage, he says. Do you agree? Should some of these multi-billionaires come and swoop in and bail out Trump?
I don't know. This is not something I'm quite familiar with. I think that President Trump has to be able to assemble the assets in order to post the bond, and I suspect that he will, because if he doesn't, you're going to start to see Tish James foreclose on those assets. And so I think that you have to have the right mix of collateral and cash, and that already was a challenge for the first bond, and I think it's even more of a challenge going forward.
Do you think that some of these really wealthy people who support former President Trump should be willing to help him here?
Well, that's not something I'm familiar with. When you speak to me about the life of a multi-billionaire, it's not really something I have great association with. I don't know what it would ever be like to have that amount of money and what it would be like to bet it on the appellate court system in New York.
Well, one last thing on Trump and his legal woes. Right now, the RNC has said that they want to help him pay for his legal bills. His leadership PAC has spent more than $55 million just on legal bills. That's 85% of its spending. Are you comfortable with that?
No, I wish he weren't being attacked like this. Trump is up in your polling.
But he is. Are you comfortable with his leadership PAC using the money that's being raised from ordinary people in a lot of cases to pay his legal bills?
Yeah, it's a necessity. Your network covers ad nauseum that this money is used for this purpose, and yet it continues to be contributed for people who believe that President Trump is under siege. And so I think that we have to view the fusion of the criminal justice system and this presidential campaign as something that we have to combat with every force we have at the RNC, in President Trump's campaign, and with our own donations. And, it does make me think, how much further ahead of Biden would we be if we weren't having to fight not only on the political front, but on the civil front, on the criminal front, and seemingly everywhere else?
One way to avoid that would be to not get into legal trouble, which Trump seems to be doing
these are
all the
such
time.
novel legal theories that oftentimes are woven together in ways that have never been applied against other people. Look at the Alvin Bragg case that's about to go to trial.
Because nobody has ever done what Trump is alleged to have done doesn't mean that he shouldn't be held accountable.
Well, but you see similar conduct not treated the same way.
I want to move on just quickly, because you heard us talking to Leader Jeffries about Trump's comments about Jewish people who vote for Democrats, which is a huge majority of American Jews in this country. Why does he keep saying things like this, questioning the loyalty of American Jewish people just because of who they vote for?
Yeah, I think he does it so that you'll carry it, right? I think with Trump, he's making an argument about how his policies were better for Israel, and he knows if he does so in the most stark terms, that's what it's going to have you and me talking about it.
Isn't that dangerous at a time when Jewish people in America are facing really unprecedented levels of threats right now?
Well, I think the Jewish people facing the most threats right now are the ones in Israel. And they were living better lives when Donald Trump was president, and our adversaries, were not on the march against our great ally.
When it comes to Trump's comments about American Jews, why does he keep saying things like this? It's not the first time, or the second time, or the third time.
My sense is that he's saying these things because he wants to draw attention to what he did in the Golan Heights. He wants to draw attention to the Abraham Accords.
And you're comfortable
all
with
of those
that?
policy reforms. Yeah, I don't give the president rhetorical advice. He's far more gifted in that regard than I am.
So you are comfortable with him using this kind of rhetoric?
Yeah, I'm not given any discomfort by the rhetoric he's used to draw attention to what he did for Israel.
All right. Congressman Matt Gaetz, thank you very much. Good to have you in the studio tonight. And up next, Donald Trump is making January 6th a cornerstone of his campaign, even saluting the rioters at a recent rally. One of the people who was convicted and served some time for January 6th joins me live to respond.